Chapter 2032. As soon as Zhang Yan finished speaking, the clap of thunder resounded once more. Accompanied by a rumbling sound, it landed heavily on the hearts of the crowd. Qinsong School? Hall Master Du Zhen? The Qinsong lineage actually had such a monstrous Weili expert? Everyone present here felt their hearts tremble, and they were terrified and uneasy. It wasn't just because of their fear towards the vast and mighty force, it was also because they noticed that they'd actually inadvertently been swept into a battle between great figures of the upper realm. Chen Jiliang couldn't help but be startled. The other party claimed to be from Qinsong School, but he didn't know him, so he must have ascended from the lower realm. But when did the magic power of someone from the lower realm become so strong? From the looks of it, even Taoist Xian Che, a spirit refinement Grand Supreme, had no choice but to retreat, so he was undoubtedly a Grand Supreme. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to pretend to be someone else. The fifth-generation sect master, Qin Qingang, was sitting cross-legged in the inner room. He couldn't help but open his eyes. Just now, he also heard that voice and felt that Weili. Moreover, the moment it appeared, Taoist Xian Che's originally omnipresent aura was forcefully suppressed, as if it didn't exist anymore. He looked outside and discovered that there was only a ball of mysterious profound energy, and he couldn't see anything clearly. Hall Master Du Zhen? He muttered a few times, then immediately transmitted a message with his divine will. Junior brother Zhua, this person, do you know him? After a while, Zhua Yuming finally replied, if it really is that person, then he is indeed a member of my Qinsong School, but not a junior under senior brother's tutelage. Qin Qingang didn't care about this, and said seriously, as long as he is a member of my Qinsong School, it's enough. With this kind of magic power, my Qinsong lineage will be able to avoid today's danger. At this moment, Taoist Xian Che looked at Zhang Yan with incomparable fear. Judging from the contact they had just now, there was no doubt that the latter's magic power was stronger than his. Not only that, because their magic powers couldn't fuse and collide, he was unable to see through Zhang Yan's origins and cultivation in the slightest. Ever since he'd attained the God refinement realm, he'd never seen such a thing. As for Zhang Yan's identity, he didn't doubt it at all. As a spirit refinement supreme expert, there was naturally no need for him to conceal his identity, so it must be true. Originally, if everything had gone smoothly, he would have already entered the land of fortune and tried to take control of this place. However, he did not expect that there would be another spirit refinement almighty who would interfere. However, since the other party claimed to be a disciple of the Qinsong, then no matter what his identity was, in terms of seniority, he was definitely lower than him. Since he couldn't use force to suppress him, he might as well reason with him. He straightened his body and raised his voice, saying, since you're a disciple of the Qinsong School, and you're still able to achieve such Weili, you must be related to the land of fortune in the lower realm. Zhang Yan looked at him indifferently and waved his sleeve. You, before Taoist Xian Che could finish his words, his figure suddenly shattered, and then he was completely drowned in the boundless profound energy. Zhang Yan's expression was calm, as if he'd done something insignificant. In fact, it was so. He borrowed the power of fortune from Busu to come here, but the other party was merely an incarnation of his consciousness that had sunk into the present world. Their statuses weren't equal. If the other party wanted to talk to him, he would have to think of a way to come here personally next time, or wait for him to come to him when he was free. There was no need to pay too much attention to him now. When the sect masters of the various lineages saw this scene, they couldn't help but reveal terrified expressions. They didn't know about the changes in the abilities of spirit refinement cultivators, but when they saw Zhang Yan sweep Taoist Xian Che away with a mere wave of his sleeve, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive, they couldn't help but tremble in fear. Although they didn't directly do anything to the Qinsong lineage this time, they came with Taoist Xian Che. In a sense, they were also involved in this matter. Now that even Taoist Xian Che was killed, what would happen to them? Some of them wanted to defend themselves, but under the Weili's suppression, it caused the magic power in their bodies to be restrained, and they couldn't move a muscle. Even though they could still think, they couldn't say a word. Luo Zhan and Miao Yu watched helplessly as Zhang Yan killed Taoist Xian Che with a wave of his sleeve. The impact was so strong that it shook both their bodies and minds. Even though they knew that spirit refinement cultivators wouldn't die so easily, no matter what the result was, this cultivator who called himself the Hall Master of Qinsong School's Duzhen Hall was undoubtedly far stronger than Taoist Xian Che. Zhang Yan's sleeves fluttered, and profound energy rose from his back as he walked down from the altar. Tao Master Luo Zhan suddenly felt his body relax a little. He knew that it was right, so he retracted his aura a little, bowed, and said with difficulty, "Grand Elder, that Grand Elder Xian Che is the Patriarch's disciple?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and said indifferently, "So what?" Just now, he had seen everything clearly from other places. If that Taoist Xian Che had come to visit the Dark Void domain according to etiquette, he could have given him some courtesy. But since he was an unwelcome guest, and his consciousness incarnation was here, why should he give him face? Saying that he was the disciple of the great underworld patriarch, could it be that the third-generation sect master, Yuan Zhongzi, was not? And how did these fellow disciples treat him? When Tao Master Luo Zhan heard this, a trace of fear arose in his heart. If the Grand Tao ancestor was reasonable, then he could naturally follow the rules. But if he was not reasonable, then everything could only be done according to the other party's mood. Tao Master Miaoyu saw that the situation was not good and immediately sent a message to Qin Jiliang, saying, "Junior brother Qin, since this person claims to be from the Qinsong school, he must have some relationship with you. We are also following the orders, and this time, we are under the leadership of the Grand Elder, and we are not free to act on our own. I hope that you can explain this matter to the Grand Elder on account of us being from the same sect." However, Qin Jiliang closed his eyes and pretended not to hear. Although Daoren was usually modest and tactful, he also had a temper. He did not know the power of the Grand Elder, but he knew that if the Grand Elder wanted to attack, then no one here would be able to escape. So there was no need to say anything, and he might as well leave this person alone. Moreover, he did not think that he could persuade a Grand Elder with just his face. Tao Master Luo Zhan forced a smile, saying, "We followed the Grand Elder Xian Che here to find a place of fortune to deal with the calamity of leaving the sky, so that the 100 lineages can find a place. Now that the Grand Elder is here, I think it is useless for us to stay here, so we will take our leave." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Although we are from the same lineage, the matters of the Qinsong school are not for you to speak. You can go back now, but this matter will not be so simple, and you will have to give the Qinsong school an explanation." As soon as he finished speaking, another thunder rumbled in the sky. Boom! At this moment, apart from Qin Jiliang who was still standing there, everyone who did not belong to the Qinsong school had disappeared without a trace. In the base of the Great Ocean sect, Dao's spiritual master felt the world spinning. When he woke up, he looked around and realized that he was sitting in the cave abode, and he did not know how he came back. His face turned extremely ugly, and he was both shocked and fearful in his heart. It was actually the Grand Elder? Why is there such a person in the Qinsong school? Since there is such a person, why didn't you say it earlier? He felt that his previous mockery of Qin Jiliang was simply making a fool of himself in front of everyone, and now he felt as embarrassed as he was happy at that time. Now, he felt as if there was a breath stuck in his throat, and it was extremely suffocating, but he could not vent it, so he could only endure it. It was not to say that it would hinder his cultivation, but it would definitely make his cultivation unsmooth. He stood up angrily, and inadvertently glanced at the sundial, and his heart shook. There was something wrong with the date engraved on it. It was yesterday, not today. Could it be that the sundial is broken? He examined it and found that it was not damaged, so he could not help but feel a trace of uneasiness in his heart. He immediately summoned his disciple and asked for the date, but found that the disciple's reply was also like the sundial, so he unconsciously became even more terrified and asked, "Do you know where I went just now?" The disciple said in confusion, "Master has been in seclusion since he visited the 2 Tao sovereigns yesterday, and he has not gone out at all." Dao's spiritual master shouted angrily, "Nonsense, I clearly went to see the 2 Tao sovereigns a few days ago, and this morning, I followed the Grand Elder to the Dark Void realm. How can you not know?" The disciple did not know what to say, and could only mumble. Daoi's spiritual master waved his hand to dismiss the disciple, then he used his magic power to check the memories of all the disciples in the sect, and to his horror, he found that not only was the time wrong, none of the disciples had heard of the name of Grand Elder Xian Che, but this matter had already spread to the 4 regions. This feeling, it was as if everything they had experienced just now was an illusion. He immediately communicated with the other sect masters through the divine intent, but he found that other than the 2 Dao sovereigns who did not respond, the situation of the other sects was the same as his. Everyone had returned to their residences, but other than the cultivators who personally went to the Dark Void Realm, no one remembered Taoist Xian Che, and their memories only stopped at yesterday, as if they had disappeared for no reason one day. Daoi's spiritual master only felt waves of coldness in his heart. Right now, he was not sure if his memories had been changed at all. Was all this real, or was it all forced on them by the Almighty of the Upper Realm? In the main hall, the 3rd-generation sect Master Yuan Zhongzi saw that the surrounding restrictions had been removed, so he walked out, and the 5th-generation sect Master Qin Qingang also came out of the cave abode. The 2 of them flew up into the sky, and stood next to Qin Jiliang. Zhang Yan solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, ancestral masters." Yuan Zhongzi was surprised. He thought for a moment, then raised his sleeve and returned the greeting, "Greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen." Qin Jiliang and Qin Qingang also returned the greeting. "Greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen." Yuan Zhongzi said, "May I ask what the situation in the lower realm is like now, Hall Master Du Zhen?" Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and as he willed, scenes were reflected in the divine intents of the previous generation sect masters. From the time the Dark Azure sect joined forces with the Shaoqing sect to fight against the sects of the 9 continents, including the Jade Firmament sect, to the time they defeated the enemy and then ascended. From the time they battled the Demon Patriarch in the Mountain and Sea realm, to the time they joined forces with the Profound Spirit sect to pacify the 4 regions, to the time they joined forces to fight Kong Yin. However, these scenes were rather vague, and could only give people a rough idea of what was going on, because Zhang Yan was not among them. As a spirit refinement cultivator, he had long since lost his past and future, and cultivators of the lower realm couldn't see him even if they wanted to. Yuan Zhongzi and the others sighed endlessly with emotion when they saw all of this. Presently, the Dark Azure sect was undoubtedly much stronger than before, and it had far exceeded their expectations. But it had undoubtedly experienced numerous difficulties and frustrations along the way, and the slightest carelessness in some dangerous areas would practically cause them to be doomed eternally. At this time, Zhang Yan said, "Since the ancestral masters are here, I will hand this item over to you to deal with." As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve, and 3 jade seals flew out, floating in front of the previous generation sect masters. Qin Jiliang looked at them and said in surprise, "These are the seals of the 3 chaotic realms?" Chapter 2033. The 3 seals in Zhang Yan's hand were obtained from Taoist Xian Che after he dispersed his consciousness incarnation. If a disciple of the great underworld patriarch possessed this item, they would receive the Whaley blessing left behind by the patriarch. The disciple would be guided to ascend from the lower realms to the great underworld patriarch, and they would also be acknowledged by the various bloodlines. It could be said that with this item, they would be able to legitimately occupy a chaotic realm. Qin Jiliang was a little surprised to see these seals. He had thought that Taoist Xian Che had come for the seals in Qinsong School's hands, but he hadn't expected that he would take away the seals in the hands of the 3 chaotic realms as well. It seemed that Taoist Xian Che's goal was even greater than he had imagined. He murmured, "What is that Grand Elder Xian Che trying to do?" Zhang Yan said, "Speaking of this, I have to mention the void-leaving tribulation that this junior spoke of. This is actually an unforeseen event in the outer realms, and because it involves a great expert, it is inconvenient for the patriarchs to know about it. However, if this tribulation comes, if there is no place to hide, even soul refinement cultivators won't be able to escape. The 4 chaotic realms all have places of fortune behind them, so it is very likely that Xian Che's goal is to devour these places of fortune and combine them into one." Yuan Zhongzi asked, Is Hall Master Du Zhen's trip here related to this as well? Zhang Yan said, this trip is indeed related to this matter. Currently, my Qinsong school and the fellow Taoists of the various sects are hiding in these places of fortune and temporarily seeking shelter. However, there is no absolute certainty in this world, so I can only do my best to make up for this loophole. Qin Jiliang said, Daoren, I've negotiated with the Qingshan sect several times. That Taoist master Luo Zhan has always declared that he's acting on the orders of the founding master. In the past, he's also used this to control our Qinsong bloodline. However, as for the contents of the orders and what the founding master said, he's never told us. Zhang Yan said, I'm already clear about this matter. That was indeed the ancestral master's order, but it was only left behind for the Qingshan sect by the ancestral master. It was said that the land of creation could avoid the tribulation of leaving the void, and it was also said that there was a heaven and earth behind each of the 4 regions that one could hide in. When the time came, there might be a disciple who could achieve deification. If the tribulation came and they felt that it was impossible to resist, then they could ask for help from that person. Other than that, this order isn't directly related to our Qinsong. It's just that Luo Zhan and Miao Yu felt that one of the land of creation wasn't very safe, and the heaven and earth behind our Qinsong bloodline is the strongest of the 4 eras. Moreover, we don't have enough power to defend ourselves, so they used this as an excuse to invade. Yuan Zhongzi and the other former sect masters of the Qinsong all fell into deep thought. Even a great deification expert like Zhang Yan had to think of a way to avoid the tribulation of leaving the void, so it was obvious that this tribulation was extremely powerful. It was very likely that the founding master had prepared 4 paths of retreat by leaving behind 4 chaotic domains. That way, if the enemy broke through one of them, they wouldn't be completely cut off. There was no way that Taoist Xianche hadn't thought of this, but he still did it. It was obvious that he'd already placed his own interests above those of the 100 lineages. Qin Jiliang said, May I ask Hall Master Du Zhen, how is that Grand Elder Xianche doing now? Zhang Yan said, this time, it's only an incarnation of him. His true body is still outside the domain. If he comes again and still doesn't change his original intention, then I'll naturally come out to deal with him. Yuan Zhongzi nodded. Actually, if there was injustice between the 100 lineages, they could still worship the founding master. However, the founding master hadn't responded for a long time. If it wasn't for that, the 2 Tao masters probably wouldn't have the idea of taking over the foundation of the Qinsong lineage. After Tao Master Luo Zhan and Tao Master Miao Yu were expelled from the chaotic void domain, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts when they learned that a day had been inexplicably erased. When Taoist Xianche was here, they only knew that his Weili was unstoppable. However, they couldn't understand the specifics because of their limited cultivation. Now, they could feel that the Grand Elder of the Spirit Refinement Realm seemed to be able to do everything that seemed inconceivable. The 2 of them hurriedly met to discuss countermeasures. Tao Master Miao Yu transmitted a message with his divine will, Senior brother, since we can't fight him, why don't we try to close the domain gate first? Tao Master Luo Zhan denied, don't say such words. With the power of the Grand Elder, do you think he doesn't know what you're doing? Even if you close the domain gate, what's the use? He doesn't need to come to you at all. He only needs to change your memories and let you open the gate on your own. Tao Master Miao Yu was also shocked when he heard him say this. If that was really the case, even he wouldn't know if it was him. He said, Senior brother is right, I was wrong. Tao Master Luo Zhan said, since the Grand Elder wants us to give an explanation, then we can only go to him to apologize and ask for forgiveness from the Qinsong lineage. It's better to do this as soon as possible. If we delay it for too long, it will make the Grand Elder unhappy, and I don't know what will happen. He thought that since Zhang Yan didn't do anything to them on the spot, as long as they sincerely begged, nothing would happen. After all, they didn't do anything to the Qinsong lineage. The key was how to deal with the sky-leaving tribulation. Even if they didn't think for themselves, they still needed to think for their disciples. Now that Taoist Xianche was gone, they could only rely on the Grand Elder of the Qinsong school. Tao Master Miao Yu said, since we're going to apologize, we should at least give him a gift. The Qinsong school lacks nothing but profound stones. We can't take out such things, so what else can we do to show our sincerity? Tao Master Luo Zhan said, the only thing is to offer the land of fortune behind us. Tao Master Miao Yu frowned and said, Senior brother, do you really want to do this? He judged others by himself. After this incident, the Qinsong school might not care about their lives. If the great calamity came, there would be no way out. Tao Master Luo Zhan could still see the situation clearly and said calmly, the seal has been taken by Grand Elder Xian Che, and I have long lost control of myself. It's better to offer it to him. If Grand Elder Xian Che comes again, it has nothing to do with me. Let the two Grand Elders fight. Tao Master Miao Yu thought about it. There was really no other way. This was also the only way out. He said, why don't we invite Senior Brother Sun Yu out first? He has a good relationship with the Qinsong school. If he pleads, maybe we can find a way to save this matter. Tao Master Luo Zhan said, okay, I'll handle this matter. Taoist Sun Yu was invited out that day. After knowing the details, he thought for a while and said, I will go with the two junior brothers and ask the Grand Elder to forgive this matter. But the two junior brothers need to know that I can't control what the Grand Elder thinks. I can only do my best. Speaking of which, his position was not biased towards the Qinsong school. He thought that the same sect should not plot against each other. The various lineages should try their best to maintain the structure left by the great underworld patriarch. However, he was also ashamed that he was unable to stop the two from invading the Black Void chaotic domain. Therefore, he was willing to go with them to apologize. On the second day, the three Tao masters Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, and Miao Yu personally went to the Black Void chaotic domain to apologize. In order to show their sincerity, they came on a spiritual boat and did not hide their whereabouts along the way. Therefore, the matter quickly spread throughout the four great chaotic domains. When the disciples of the Yudzong sect learned of this, they were overwhelmed with emotions. In the past, because the Yudzong sect didn't have a true yang cultivator, they had to occupy a chaotic domain by themselves. When they interacted with the other sects, they were often targeted and ostracized. But now, their prestige had risen, and they felt proud. Yuan Zhongzi came to find Chen Jiliang and said, the three sects Tao masters came to visit, and Hall Master Duzhen said that he would no longer interfere in this matter. Senior brother, how do you think we should deal with it? Chen Jiliang thought for a while and said, the seal of the Jiuan sect should be returned. The seals of the Qingchen sect and the Fuli sect can be kept in our hands for a while. He thought that with the Grand Elder like Zhang Yan here, there was no difference whether the seal was in their hands or not. Moreover, they did not need to covet the land of the other sections. Otherwise, there would be no difference with what Luo Zhan and Miao Yu did. But this time, the two sects had come to bully them, so they had no choice but to pay attention to it. Otherwise, they would think that the Qinsong school was easy to bully, so they could keep it for a while. As for how long, it would depend on what happened in the future. At this time, Zhang Yan was walking in the encampment of the Qinsong lineage. But as his mind turned, he was looking at the various chaotic domains and the world behind them. But other than these two domains that could be clearly seen, the one behind the Qingchen sect was incomparably blurry. That should be where Taoist Xian Che was. When he met Taoist Xian Che, he had thought about it. Although the other party was a soul refinement cultivator, he had never seen or felt the existence of the other party's magic power. Either the other party was concealed by the magic power of someone with a higher realm, or he had always been hiding in a place of fortune like the determined world or Busha heaven. Otherwise, once the existence that invaded all things arrived, there would be no way for him to hide. But whether he was the only one in that place, or whether there were other people of the same generation staying there, he still did not know. Moreover, since the place where the Qinsong school ascended existed among the four great sects of the 9 continents, then the Shaoqing sect, Yuxiao sect, and even the Nether Spring sect must also have a place to go. Perhaps they were also hiding in a similar place. Also, Taoist Master Fan Tu, who ascended from the 9 continents back then, was not limited to the people of the 3 great sections. Now, he did not know where they went. With his magic power, even if this person died in the endless void, he could still trace the process. But in reality he did not see any traces, which was enough to prove that after leaving the 9 continents, they also had a place to go. In order to fight against that existence, especially now that he needed to rescue Quan Dao and Yi Shiwen as much as possible, just the 5 of them were not enough. The more people, the better. If he could find the whereabouts of those ancestors or more of his fellow Taoists, perhaps he could join forces to do this. At this moment, in the place of fortune that connected with the clear sync chaotic domain, inside a cave dwelling, Taoist Xian Che was cultivating. But suddenly he felt his consciousness incarnation disappear, and he couldn't help but be surprised. Then his expression turned cold, and he thought to himself, could it be that someone of the same Taoist has interfered? Other than his fellow Taoist Master Shin, it was impossible for anyone to threaten his consciousness incarnation. But in the chaotic domain, there was a Weili of the great underworld ancestral master, so just now, no news had come back. Otherwise, he would at least know what was going on. As if sensing that he had woken up from his meditation, a cold voice suddenly sounded, "Fellow Taoist Xian Che, how is it? Have you found the place of fortune essence?" Taoist Xian Che was silent for a moment before replying, "My incarnation just now disappeared for no reason. It seems that something unexpected happened. Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment." The voice said, "Fellow Taoist Xian Che, don't forget what you promised me." Taoist Xian Che stood up and said coldly, "Of course I haven't forgotten. I will find a way to investigate this matter and give you an explanation." Chapter 2034. Zhang Yan's original plan was to merge this chaotic realm into Busha Heaven and eliminate the loopholes in his control as much as possible. But when he saw that the Black Void chaotic realm was connected to the other 3 realms, he temporarily put this plan on hold. Because if he did that, the Black Void chaotic realm would be completely isolated from the other realms and would no longer be connected. Even if he could leave Busha Heaven now, it wouldn't be easy to find these realms again in the vast void, much less with the existence of that existence outside. But since every chaotic realm was connected to a land of fortune, it meant that profound stones could be produced in these realms at least, and there was even a possibility of attaining the spirit refinement realm. From what Tao Sovereign Luo Zhan knew, Taoist Xian Che had only recently attained the spirit refinement realm. In that case, it seemed that he was able to achieve this with the help of the land of fortune behind him. Of course, that was if he didn't encounter any other opportunities. If the remaining 2 realms were similar to this land of fortune, then logically speaking, it was also possible for a cultivator to attain the spirit refinement realm. But usually, a place with the essence of fortune would at most produce a cultivator to attain the spirit refinement realm, and it all depended on luck and fortune. Otherwise, these 2 realms wouldn't have remained silent until now. He thought for a moment and decided to go to one of the realms to investigate. However, the chaotic realm was outside of the land of fortune, and he could only go there when the 2 realms connected. He calculated in his mind. The 4 realms connected to the lower realms in a certain order. Clear Chen would arrive first, then Qinsong, then Floating Li, and then Auspicious Source. After a while, they would gradually separate again. Clear Chen sect was where Taoist Xian Che lived. He didn't plan to meet him before straightening out the chaotic realm, so he eliminated it first. Floating Li and Auspicious Source were the only 2 left. Floating Li sect's door would open a day later. Actually, with his magic power, he could directly enter the 2 realms before they completely connected, but when he thought of the pair of eyes in the void, he felt that it was better to restrain his movements. It would be bad if he accidentally attracted the attention of that existence. He waited for the day when the 2 realms would come close to each other as he predicted. He immediately split a wisp of his consciousness and cast it into that world. As soon as he entered, he immediately scanned his surroundings. Even though this place could be said to be the lower realm of the Fuli sect, there were numerous sects here. Even though the Fuli sect could be said to be a large sect here, it didn't occupy a dominant position. The reason for this was that ever since Vast Jade became a true Yang cultivator, in order to avoid the tribulation of leaving the void mentioned in the Imperial Edict, he issued an edict that all cultivators in the lower realms who reached the heavenly abode realm should immediately use the edict to come to the chaotic realm. They were not allowed to stay in the lower realms. This kind of thing couldn't be done in the 9 continents. The 9 continents' heaven and earth gate was especially strong. Unless one cultivated to the mortal transformation realm, one could forget about taking even half a step out of the outer world. In truth, the chaotic domain was originally located in the Land of Fortune. If the Land of Fortune was affected by the void-leaving tribulation, then the flowing chaotic domain wouldn't be able to escape as well. However, the flowing chaotic domain still had a path of retreat. Because the 4 chaotic domains were connected, they could hide in other chaotic domains. From the looks of it, Vast Jade and Luo Zhan should have long set their sights on the Qinsong lineage. After Zhang Yan circled around, he immersed his consciousness into the depths of this world. He confirmed that this place was indeed where the essence of creation was. However, as he had previously known, this place was far inferior to Bu Shutian. Perhaps Luo Zhan and Vast Jade had also noticed this, which was why they wanted to occupy the same chaotic domain. He retracted his qi dynamic and looked out of the present world. He found that there was a pressure shrouding it, but it was not difficult to recognize that it was caused by the aftereffects of that existence's mana. Even though that existence had not set this place as its target, there was no one controlling this place after all. Once that existence's consciousness was focused here, it could immediately seize this place and use it as a bargaining chip to increase its strength. However, no spirit refinement cultivator could appear here in a short period of time, so it was impossible for there to be a master here. If that was the case, in order to avoid this, he could only do it himself. But if he relied on his own strength, there would be many difficulties. Fortunately, he had the backing of Bu Shutian Weili, so it wasn't difficult to do this. He thought, I need to talk to the people of the 3 sections. Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, and Vast Jade, the 3 Dao Masters, crossed the world and traveled for many days before they arrived at the Black Void chaotic domain. In front of the Qinsong lineage, they bowed to apologize. In order to show their sincerity, Luo Zhan and Vast Jade even invited the heads of the 100 lineages to be witnesses. Whether they thought so or not, at least they had done enough. They were of the same lineage, so it wasn't good to not give face. In the end, no one in the Qinsong school was harmed. Yuan Zhongzi said on the spot that this matter was over and would not pursue it in the future. In the future, the disciples of the school were not allowed to mention this matter when they went out, or they would be punished for disrespecting their elders. He also returned the seal from the Jiuan sect. Luo Zhan and Vast Jade thought that after Xian Che disappeared, the seal was taken away along with him. They didn't expect that it would fall into the hands of the Qinsong school in the end. But after thinking about it carefully, they realized that this was a good thing for them. Because if Taoist Xian Che came again, he wouldn't look for them. He would only look for the Qinsong school that held the seal. At least they wouldn't need to be involved in the battle of the Spirit Refinement Grand Supreme anymore. After apologizing, the 3 prepared to leave. At this moment, a Taoist child came and said, 3 Tao Masters, the Grand Supreme requests your presence. Taoist Sun Yu said, since the Grand Supreme has invited us, we should go and pay our respects. Sun Yu and the other 2 followed the Taoist child to a hall. They saw Zhang Yan sitting upright on a praying mat. The profound energy behind him soared into the sky, and there was also a brilliant 5-colored aura that covered the sky and the earth. He was clearly sitting there, but he gave off the feeling that he was everywhere. Taoist Sun Yu's cultivation was the highest among the 3. He had followed the great underworld patriarch for the longest time, so his knowledge was also above the other 2. He understood that when a cultivator reached this level, they could no longer be restrained by any heaven and earth. They could leave at any time. Not mentioning the other party's identity, just his cultivation was worthy of respect. He immediately bowed and said, the Grand Supreme greets you. Luo Zhan and Vast Jade also bowed. Zhang Yan, however, stood up and returned the bow. He said, greetings, everyone. He spread his sleeves and made an inviting gesture. Please sit down and talk. Taoist Sun Yu was originally on friendly terms with Qinsong, so he deserved his bow. As for Luo Zhan and Vast Jade, although they had disagreements before, now that the 2 sides had reconciled, there was no need to look at them as before. After all, These two were also the great underworld patriarch's direct disciples, so they should be given some face. The three looked at each other and sat down. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and sat down as well. He said, I have already seen that there is a place of fortune behind the chaotic domain where everyone lives. This place has great implications, so we can't ignore it. Tao Master Luozhan said, if the Grand Supreme needs it, feel free to take it. According to the Patriarch's decree, there should be a Grand Supreme who can help us avoid the calamity of leaving the sky. Tao Master Miao Yu also said, that's right. The Grand Supreme's cultivation is far superior to Xian Chei's, so it's more suitable for him to do this. Zhang Yan smiled and said, it's not that I'm useful and I don't want to occupy your place. It's just that the existence of this world can be used to protect us, but it can also attract the calamity. Taoist Sun Yu asked, the Grand Supreme is referring to the calamity of leaving the sky. But if this place can protect us, why would it attract the calamity? Zhang Yan said, if this land of fortune needs to protect living beings, then it needs to have a deity ascension cultivator, or else it will be an ownerless land. The tribulations of void separation is triggered by an unfathomable existence. If he or she discovers these places, he or she can come and invade them at any time. Not only will I not be able to use them, but I will also be adding to his power. When Taoist Miao Yu heard this, he raised his head, cupped his hands and said, Grand Supreme, forgive me for asking this boldly. Since it's like what the Grand Supreme said, then isn't what the Grand Supreme is doing the right way? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, if it's really possible to take over the 4 regions' places of fortune, then it can indeed be considered a good thing. Unfortunately, in my opinion, although the Xian Chei has the intention, he doesn't have the ability to do so. Among these 4 places of fortune essence, Bu Xiutian was the most difficult to control. He was able to do so because the profound stone used for his success was originally nurtured here. Moreover, he was originally in the present world, so he was originally connected to Bu Xiutian. Both sides could be said to be incomparably compatible. Taoist Xian Chei was someone from another world. It wasn't impossible for him to achieve this, but he would have to pay more than him, let alone take over a place of fortune. He was afraid that before he could succeed, that existence who could destroy all beings would have already killed his way here. Of course, if there wasn't just one person behind Taoist Xian Chei and he had the help of other people of the same generation, then there was a certain chance that they could succeed if they each took charge of a place. Actually, he thought that this possibility was instead the highest based on his objective. Because this involved too much spirit refinement Weili, it was impossible for people of the lower realms to explain in too much detail. Thus, he only roughly explained it to the 3 of them, and also mentioned his own guess. When Sun Yu and the others heard this, they instantly realized the severity of the problem. Putting aside the void-leaving tribulation, if there was someone else behind Xian Chei, then it definitely couldn't be the ancestral master's disciple. No matter how the 4 regions fought in the past, they were of the same bloodline. If there was an outsider involved, then it would be a different matter. He stood up and bowed solemnly, saying, "We are powerless to fight against an upper realm expert. If that's really the case, then I'll leave everything to you, Grand Supreme." Taoist Xian Chei stood in front of the altar with a heavy expression. Originally, before the upper and lower realms were connected, Taoist Luozhan had already been in contact with them. However, no matter how he called out, there was no response. Either they weren't in the sect, or they were unwilling or afraid to respond. Right now, he was anxious to find out what exactly happened in the chaotic domain. He wasn't like Zhang Yan, who controlled Bu Su Tian. His main body couldn't go there, so he could only continue to send his avatar to investigate. However, as long as his avatar entered the domain and observed carefully, he would be able to find out everything. Unless the opponent who killed his avatar had been waiting there all along. If that was the case, it meant that the chaotic domain was very likely already occupied by someone else. That was the most troublesome situation. He guided his consciousness, and in an instant, an avatar walked out. It passed through the gate of 2 realms and once again headed towards the clear sync chaotic domain. Chapter 2035. Taoist Xianche's consciousness incarnation appeared once more in the clear sync chaotic domain. He was prepared for the worst when he came, but the attack he expected didn't happen. This made him feel slightly relieved. This proved that the person who destroyed his incarnation wasn't after him. It was very likely that there was a conflict because of some reason. As long as he could communicate with the other party, there would always be a way to solve the problem. At the very least, he would be able to understand the other party. He scanned the entire chaotic domain and found that the master of the clear sync sect, Tao Venerable Luozhan, wasn't here. When his consciousness extended to the other chaotic domains, it was blocked by a force. This was the Whaley left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Of course, the reason why Taoist Xianche was blocked was because it was only his consciousness incarnation that came here. If his true body could come here, he could still bypass this force and achieve his goal. This didn't mean that the Whaley left behind by the patriarch was weak. It was because once it exceeded a certain limit, the chaotic domain itself would be crushed first. In order to prevent that from happening, the Whaley was destined to exist only in a limited form. Taoist Xianche immediately moved his consciousness and left the clear sync chaotic domain. He was about to explore other chaotic domains, but at this moment he sensed an aura in the flowing chaotic domain. This meant that the other party had been here before. Even though they hadn't met face to face, the tyrannical power contained behind the other party's back was exceptionally shocking. Thus, he directly used his own magic power to test the other party. At the same time, he wanted to find a way to understand the general situation on the other side from the collision of magic power. However, the situation exceeded his expectations. Just now, when he tried to do so, his entire body shattered with a loud bang in the next moment. Inside the cave, Taoist Xianche's true body was waiting for news. Suddenly, he frowned because his consciousness incarnation had actually collapsed and dispersed once again. However, this time, because a remnant of his consciousness was transmitted back, he finally found something useful. He learned that the other party's Whaley was especially powerful. Just now, the result wasn't actually the other party's counterattack. The difference between the two parties was so great that the collision of magic power didn't form a resistance and directly destroyed his incarnation. The other party seemed to have entered with their true bodies. He didn't know how they did it, but he knew that he couldn't do the same thing. If he forced it, it would only cause the chaotic realm to move further away from him, or perhaps he would never be able to touch it again. The difference in power meant that the two of them could not speak equally. Even if it was him, if there was no friendship between the two of them, he would not have the mood to communicate with a consciousness avatar of the same generation. However, after thinking about it, he decided to continue sending his doppelgangers. This time, he wasn't going to probe the other party, but rather to invite the other party over for a chat. If the other party was apprehensive and was unwilling to come, then both parties could communicate through their consciousness avatars. However, if the other party refused to communicate with him, that would be the worst-case scenario. He hadn't figured out what to do yet, so he could only wait and see if the first step could be achieved. With that in mind, another consciousness incarnation walked out and entered the clear sync chaotic realm again. A wisp of Zhang Yan's consciousness was immersed in the land of fortune behind the Fu Li sect. He was prepared to take control of this place just like how he controlled Bu Su Tian. However, if that existence suddenly invaded at this time, then he would immediately give up on this place to prevent the other party from finding the other chaotic realms and the land of fortune behind them. As for whether he should combine the 4 lands of fortune into one, he had no plans to do so for the time being. The structure of the 4 domains was undoubtedly arranged by the great underworld patriarch, so there might be a deeper meaning behind it. Therefore, he didn't plan to destroy the structure here. Even if the 3 domains were under his control, he would only control them separately and not mix them together. If it was only out of consideration for the urgent situation, he could have asked Taoist priest Shunchang and the others to come over and help him, or even entrust these few domains to them. However, the problem was that all the sects here were taught by the great underworld patriarch. He could interfere because he was a true disciple of the Qinsong school, so it was perfectly justifiable for him to do this. However, it would be extremely inappropriate if he let outsiders here, so he should try to avoid it. Moreover, there was no contract between spirit refinement cultivators, so there was a limit to their trust. If they weren't under his control, it would be very difficult to guarantee that things would develop in the direction he wanted. It should be known that even spirit refinement cultivators themselves couldn't guarantee that things would develop in the direction they wanted. At this moment, his consciousness was constantly immersed in the depths of this land of fortune. He had the experience of refining Bu Shutian once, so he had learned a lot. His progress was considered smooth, but there were obstacles because he was not from this world, so he could not perfectly merge with it. Fortunately, he had Bu Shutian to back him up, so he was strong enough to defeat the weak. In the end, he was able to do this. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly sensed something. After pondering for a moment, an incarnation walked out of his body and walked outside. This time, Taoist Xian Che didn't try to use his magic power to contact Zhang Yan again. Instead, he obediently walked towards the flowing muddy domain. After entering this place, he said, "I'm here to discuss something. Fellow Taoist, please show yourself." Not long after, he suddenly discovered that there was a hole in his perception. Then, he saw a young Taoist dressed in a black robe with 5 lights shining on his back. He walked on profound energy, and his aura was restrained like a bottomless abyss. Taoist Xian Che's heart trembled. The person who came was undoubtedly an incarnation of his consciousness, but the Weili he displayed was still stronger than him. He raised his sleeves, cupped his hands, and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan also raised his sleeves and bowed. Taoist Xian Che said, "This time, I took the liberty of asking you to come out, fellow Taoist. Why did you destroy my incarnation, fellow Taoist?" He had tried to understand what had happened from the cultivators of the chaotic domain, but either they didn't know, or he was blocked by an inexplicable power. In order to avoid suffering the same fate as last time, he decisively stopped and chose to question Taoist Xian Che now. Zhang Yan said, "It's not enough that you've obtained the land of fortune behind the clear sink muddy domain, but you still want to invade other sects and Qinsong's land of fortune. This is too much, so I just now stopped you." Taoist Xian Che said in surprise, "Fellow Taoist, are you from the Qinsong bloodline?" He felt troubled, and this was what he didn't want to see the most. If it was someone from the outside world, he would have a righteous reason to call for help even if he couldn't defeat the other party. However, the other party was also a descendant of the great underworld ancestral master, so he couldn't use this method. However, these lands of fortune were very important to him. Not only were they used to avoid the void-leaving tribulation, but they were also related to a certain promise. He couldn't give them up, so he said, "Back then, the patriarch told me to do my best to help the sects of the 4 regions avoid the void-leaving tribulation. Back then, the patriarch had instructed me to do my best to help the sects of the 4 regions avoid the calamity of leaving the void. The reason I sent my avatar here earlier was because of this." After pausing for a moment, he said in a serious tone, "I am only acting according to the patriarch's instructions." Fellow Taoist stopping me seems to be going against the patriarch's words. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "But the patriarch didn't say anything about combining the lands of fortune. The division of the 4 regions was decided by the patriarch back then. Without the patriarch's orders, it's only right for I to protect them." Taoist Xian Che frowned. He raised his hand and took out an item. He held it in his palm and said, "The token is here." Zhang Yan glanced at it. It was a jade talisman. Every direct disciple of the great underworld patriarch had such an item. Yuan Zhongzi, Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, Miao Yu, and the others all had such a token. He smiled and said, "This item can only prove that you're indeed the patriarch's direct disciple, but it can't prove that the merging of the lands of fortune was the patriarch's words. It can't be trusted." Taoist Xian Che frowned and said, "Is this still not enough? The edict originally ordered me to help the various sects avoid the great calamity. You should understand that without the land of fortune behind the dark void domain, just the other 3 places might not be able to withstand the calamity of leaving the void." Zhang Yan said solemnly, "I am a disciple of the Qinsong sect. I naturally won't sit by and watch my fellow sect members suffer such a great calamity. When the time comes, I will do my best to protect them. You don't have to worry about this." Taoist Xianche looked deeply at him. Zhang Yan's words had imperceptibly dissolved his biggest excuse. Knowing that there was no way to continue the discussion today, he didn't say anything more. He cupped his hands and turned to leave. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. If it was really as he had guessed and there was someone behind it, then that person would definitely do something. However, he wasn't afraid in the slightest since he was here. The biggest enemy at the moment was still from outside. When he thought up to this point, he suddenly sensed something. He noticed that the aura of that person had changed slightly. It seemed to be strong and weak at times, but it wasn't like this before. He couldn't help but be moved. That existence should be searching for the essence of fortune with all his might at this moment and trying to steal and devour it to strengthen himself. Even if he hadn't found this place for the time being, he would definitely find another place. Therefore, during this period of time, his strength should be rising, and he should be able to sense it very easily. He didn't think that suppressing Quan Dao and the other person would be able to delay his full strength. Just from the fact that he easily stopped them from entering Busushan, it was obvious that this matter wasn't as difficult as he imagined. Such a situation allowed him to make a guess. Since the great underworld patriarch and his peers had predicted the void-leaving tribulation, there was no reason for them not to make a backup plan. They must have made preparations. Looking for a place that could be used to shelter the essence of fortune was one of the reasons. Stepping forward bravely and taking the initiative to eliminate the danger was another. Now that his strength couldn't grow, and there were fluctuations in his aura, it was very likely that someone had appeared to stop him. If that was the case, could he try to contact that person? He thought for a moment and gave up on this idea. Because if there was really someone who could fight against that existence, then his cultivation was obviously very high. Even if he didn't completely conceal his magic power and aura so that others couldn't sense him, he wasn't someone that could be easily found by others. His gaze suddenly became a little deeper. It would be best if the one fighting against that existence could win, but if he failed and was suppressed into eternal silence, that would be the worst situation. Not only would there be one less almighty who could fight against that existence, but that existence would take a great step forward on the path of invading and destroying everything. Chapter 2036. Zhang Yan pondered deeply. Since that existence couldn't leave for the time being, could he use this time to do something? For example, finding a way to rescue Quan Dao and Xin Qingqiu. Or, if his true body left Bu Shutian and sank his consciousness into the land of fortune behind the flowing muddy domain, it would only take an instant for him to enter the void. However, even though he thought of all these, there were still some problems that he needed to solve in reality. Because the other 4 people of the same generation were also in Bu Shutian, it was impossible for his true body to leave Bu Shutian. Otherwise, no one knew what would happen if he lost his suppression. Also, even if he left Bu Shutian, he might not be able to find the real world where the flowing muddy domain resided. As for directly escaping to the void from the land of fortune, it was also impossible. Although this place and Bu Shutian both belonged to the essence of fortune, since they were separated, they were already 2 different worlds. Before he completely refined them, he couldn't enter with his true body. After thinking for a while, he thought that although there were all kinds of difficulties here, it wasn't impossible. For example, when he went to rescue Quan Dao and Xin Qingqiu, he could summon Shen Chang and the others. However, there was a prerequisite, and that was that the chaotic domain had to be safe and sound first. If there was someone spying on him in the real world at all times, then he couldn't disregard everything and go out to face that existence. So no matter what, if he wanted to take the initiative to attack, he had to first deal with Taoist Xianche. If he didn't deal with this place, then he wouldn't be able to do anything. However, he didn't plan to take the initiative to find that person. The land of fortune behind Qingchen Tian was his home field, and he didn't know what the situation was like there. It was definitely not a good choice to go there rashly. Instead of that, he might as well wait for that person to come to him. However, he believed that he wouldn't have to wait for too long. After all, the land of fortune behind Qingchen Tian and the land of fortune were connected for a time. After a period of time, the two realms would be separated again. If Taoist Xianche didn't come to him before then, he didn't know how long it would take for him to wait for the next opportunity. If that person wasn't afraid of that existence coming to find him, then he could try waiting. He would be happy to see that happen. However, if that existence in the void had already finished off his opponent during this period of time, causing him to no longer have a chance to attack, then that would be the will of the heavens. It was not that he was unwilling to do so, but that it was beyond his power to do so. On the other side, Taoist Xianche's consciousness avatar had already returned to his original body, and he instantly understood everything. He knew that he couldn't solve this matter by himself, so he raised his head and said, "Is fellow Taoist Rindu here?" Not long after, a voice appeared and said, "Fellow Taoist is looking for me? Has the matter over there been settled?" Taoist Xianche said, "I ran into some trouble." The voice said with displeasure, "Fellow Taoist, you promised us." Taoist Xianche interrupted the voice and said, "That is indeed the case. I have also tried my best to fulfill my promise. This trip was not able to fulfill my wish, and this is not what I want to see either. If fellow Taoist still wishes to fulfill your earlier promise, then you should be thinking about how to resolve this matter instead of blaming me." The voice fell silent for a while before it spoke again. "What kind of trouble is it exactly?" Taoist Xianche said, "I met a fellow Taoist who cultivated the spirit refinement realm there." The voice didn't seem too surprised. It was obvious that it had a certain guess after Taoist Xianche's avatar disappeared for no reason. It said, "It seems that someone has their eyes on the land of creation as well. I will send my avatar to deal with this matter together with fellow Taoist." Taoist Xianche said, "If this matter could be easily resolved, then I wouldn't have said that it was troublesome." He emphasized, "Based on my contact with him, it seems that the person who foiled my plan can enter the chaotic realm directly." The owner of the voice didn't speak for a long time. He originally thought that Taoist Xianche was deliberately evading him in order to obtain more things, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. Although some of them had already refined the land of creation before them, it wasn't enough to protect everyone, and it couldn't help any of them enter the chaotic realm directly. While the consciousness avatar was enough to deal with those of the lower realm, it wasn't a threat at all when facing those of the same realm. After a while, it asked, "How is this person's cultivation?" Taoist Xianche replied, "It's above mine, but I can't find out his foundation. He has most likely passed the barrier of understanding the truth, but I can't guess if he's even stronger." At this time, the aura in front of him suddenly shook, and an old Taoist with an ancient face walked out. This person asked with a serious expression, "Fellow Taoist Xianche, could it be that you can't try to persuade this person?" Compared to choosing to fight, he preferred to use a gentle method to resolve this matter. It wasn't that they didn't dare to fight, but when facing a fellow spirit refinement realm cultivator, direct conflict was the most unwise choice. After all, even if they could defeat the opponent, they couldn't kill him completely. In the end, it would only bring more trouble. Taoist Xianche shook his head and said, "He won't give up that land of creation." Daoren asked, "Why?" Taoist Xianche said, "Because this person comes from a sect, and he's also the ancestral master's bloodline." The old man immediately understood what he meant. If that land of creation was originally an ownerless object, when an external force or someone who was originally involved with this place intervened, then the other party might choose to compromise and give up. However, since he could openly take the land of creation as his own, why would he agree to share it with others? Just like Taoist Xianche himself, if it wasn't for a certain reason, he wouldn't have agreed to let them have a share of this place. He said very discontentedly, "Fellow Taoist, didn't you say that it's impossible for any of your ancestral master's descendants to reach the spirit refinement realm?" Taoist Xianche frowned and said, "I thought so back then too, because the ancestral master never mentioned this person, and he didn't even mention that there was someone among the younger generation who could achieve such an achievement. The matters that the ancestral master took care of back then were all entrusted to me, so how could I have imagined that there would be such a variable?" That Daoren said in a deep voice, "If we want to fight against this person, then we can only refine a magic artifact to help us enter the chaotic domain." Taoist Xian Che thought for a moment. If they used the fragment of the essence of creation, they could indeed refine such a magic artifact to help them restrain their magic power and enter the chaotic domain or even the land of creation. However, he thought of a flaw. It takes a lot of time to refine such a magic artifact, and we may not be able to wait that long. If it was an ordinary treasure, they could refine it in an instant, but this kind of thing was different. It required more time and energy. If that existence came looking for them during this period of time, or if the two realms closed, then even if they refined it, it would be useless. Daoren said, "Just now, I've already inspected it, and it's very peaceful in the void. That existence won't come looking for us in the short term, so you don't have to worry, fellow Taoist." When he said that, he added, "Moreover, it won't take long to refine this thing." Taoist Xian Che immediately reacted and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you going to use the power of creation to refine the magic artifact?" The old Taoist said, "That's right. It's indeed too slow to refine it with just our powers alone. However, we now possess a land of fortune, and we can use its power to complete this task." Taoist Xian Che thought for a moment and agreed that it was indeed possible. Although the magic artifact refined this way wouldn't be perfect and wouldn't last long, they didn't need to pursue this right now. He said, "Then we need to hurry up. The two realms won't wait for us for long." That Daoren didn't say anything. His body disappeared like an illusion, just like how he came. 3 days later, that Daoren returned. When Taoist Xian Che saw that person, his eyes couldn't help but focus. That person didn't appear in front of him as an incarnation like before, but appeared in person. Moreover, he had restrained his magic power. He said, "It seems that fellow Taoist has already refined that magic artifact." That Daoren waved his sleeve, and a ray of spiritual light was cast over. Taoist Xian Che saw that it was a spiritual bead, and with a thought, he withdrew it into his body. He silently circulated it for a moment, and said, "Just the two of us?" That Daoren said indifferently, "Is just the two of us not enough? We're going to let that person know that we can also appear in front of him. Even if his cultivation is higher than ours, he won't dare to take the risk of leaving the chaotic realm to attack us." Taoist Xian Che nodded, understanding what he meant. If the spirit refinement cultivators fought in the chaotic realm, then both sides would leave the chaotic realm and return to the void. Such consequences wouldn't matter if it was on a normal day, but there was that person in the void right now, and he probably wouldn't let go of any spirit refinement cultivator who appeared in the range of his magic power. Therefore, they only went to let that person know that they had the ability to cause such consequences. Since the separation of the two realms wasn't far away, the two of them didn't waste too much time here. After a brief discussion, they sank into the clear sync chaotic realm together. After arriving here, the two of them didn't stop and went straight to the black void chaotic realm. At this moment, Zhang Yan was sitting on the sky cloud platform. He looked up when he sensed the two's auras, and saw Taoist Xian Che and Daoren coming together. He could tell with a glance that the two of them had come with their real bodies. Taoist Xian Che came forward, cupped his fist, and bowed. He said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. I'm here today for the matter of last time." His tone was slightly solemn as he said, "I know that you've already occupied the land of fortune behind the black void chaotic realm. Since you've already obtained it, we won't fight with you over it. As long as you're willing to let us take the other places of fortune, we can avoid a conflict." Their original plan was to occupy the land of fortune behind the 3 chaotic realms, and then use the power of the 3 places to refine Bu Su Tian. Now that Zhang Yan was blocking their way, they couldn't achieve their goal, so they could only settle for the next best thing. Zhang Yan looked at Taoist Xian Che and said indifferently, "The ancestral master told you to borrow the land of fortune to return to the Vein Protection realm to pass on his teachings, but now you want to share this land with me. Please forgive me for not being able to agree to this." Chapter 2037. Taoist Xian Che's expression turned slightly ugly when he saw Zhang Yan's refusal, but it returned to normal in the blink of an eye. He said, "How is this a private matter? Even if I have those blessed lands in my hands, why would I not care about the juniors of the same sect? With the ancestral master's decree, as long as it's passed down by the ancestral master, I will definitely protect them and not let anything happen to them. However, Zhang Yan said, your words are unconvincing. Today, you conspired with outsiders to steal the place that was passed down by the ancestral master. It's not your private property, but you insist on giving it to others. With such actions in the past, how do you know if you will place the outsider's interests above the interests of the same sect in the future? Taoist Xianche was even more displeased when he heard him say that, but he still tried to defend himself. How could you not know that with the tribulation of void leaving in front of us, how could I resist it with my strength alone? With the help of a few fellow Taoists, I will have a higher chance of success. This way, I will be able to refine the blessed lands faster. If I can gather all these lands in one place in the future, I won't have to fear this tribulation anymore, and I will be able to better protect the sects and bloodlines. Daoran also said, your words don't make sense. We are all soul refinement cultivators, and we have no interaction with those of the lower realms. No matter what, they will not come to take advantage of us. Protecting them is just a small matter, and it doesn't cost us anything. Why do we have to be such evil people? Offend the ancestral master above us for no reason? Zhang Yan sneered. Soul refinement cultivators indeed wouldn't bicker with the cultivators of the lower realms, and they wouldn't care about their lives either. If they obtained the blessed lands and Taoist Xianche said a few words, perhaps those sects would really be protected. However, his words seemed to make sense, but in reality he intentionally avoided one thing, and that was the great underworld ancestral master had left the ancestral master's juniors in the first place. What did it have to do with these people? In other words, the 100 lineages sects were the masters of those blessed lands. Now that the owner hadn't said anything, the outsiders were saying that they could protect them after taking over this place. What kind of logic was that? Of course, not everything in the world could be reasoned with. At the end of the day, it all depended on who was stronger and who was weaker. If the 4 great chaotic realms didn't have a spirit refinement almighty on their side, then there was no point in saying all this. But now that he was here, that person could forget about getting what he wanted. Ignoring Daoran, he looked at Taoist Xianche and said, I have a question. Is the blessed land behind the clear sync chaotic realm still in your hands? Taoist Xianche frowned and said, so what if I am? So what if I am not? Zhang Yan said, if not, you couldn't even protect the land of fortune behind you, and it fell into someone else's hands. How can you protect the sect? Taoist Xianche immediately fell silent. When Zhang Yan saw this, he immediately understood that the person in charge of the blessed land wasn't Taoist Xianche. From this point of view, it was no wonder that Taoist Xianche was on the outsider's side. If he refused to cooperate, he would probably be driven out immediately. However, it was strange that Taoist Xianche had occupied this place because of the great underworld ancestral master's arrangements, but now it had fallen into someone else's hands. No one knew what had happened to him. The old Taoist saw that Zhang Yan's attitude was firm and that he wasn't willing to give in. His voice was slightly cold as he said, it seems that fellow Taoist is not willing to give in. Since words won't work, then we can only compete with force. Zhang Yan could hear the threat in his words. He smiled faintly and said, very well. Since you want to fight, why don't we fight right here and now? As soon as he said that, the magic power that he had originally restrained suddenly spread out and instantly collided with the magic power of the two people. Daoran was shocked. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan would attack immediately because of a disagreement. Was he really not afraid of that existence coming to find him after falling into the void? If it was possible, he didn't want to attack either. Just now, he wanted to make Zhang Yan feel apprehensive. But since things had come to this, he couldn't care about anything else. He immediately changed his mind and met the attack with his magic power. Before the magic power of both sides collided, the surrounding chaotic domains suddenly faded. Then, both sides realized that they had unconsciously jumped into the void. This was because the chaotic domain couldn't coexist with their enormous Weili. So, the two of them separated in an instant. When Taoist Xianche and Daoran saw that they had fallen into the void, they immediately went on full alert. Their expressions also became extremely grave. Right now, the most dangerous enemy in the void was undoubtedly that existence. If they discovered that it had come to find them, they would immediately give up on this matter and try to escape back to the land of fortune that protected them. The moment Zhang Yan released his magic power, he had already split his consciousness to go to where Taoist Shunchang and the others were. He attached great importance to Bu Shutian. It would be fine if he was alone, but there were many fellow Taoists and disciples here. He had no choice but to be cautious. Since he had already come out, he wouldn't let Taoist Shunchang and the others stay here. So, he was prepared to summon them. Ever since Taoist Shunchang and the others entered Bu Shutian, they had been cultivating diligently. When they saw his incarnation, they hurriedly stood up and greeted him. Zhang Yan roughly explained his deduction and invited the four of them to come to the void to watch over him. The four of them didn't dare to disobey. Even though they were afraid of that existence in the void, Zhang Yan was the master of Bu Shutian. Right now, he was negotiating with them politely, but if they refused, then Zhang Yan could expel them from Bu Shutian at will. If that happened, it was obvious what would happen to them. At this moment, Taoist Shunchang said that Taoist Xian Che probably has helpers outside. If we leave this place, will there be outsiders who will take advantage of this? It wasn't that he didn't want to leave, but he was indeed worried. After all, Bu Shutian was the only place they could stay. He had no choice but to consider this. Zhang Yan said, "You're right, fellow Taoist. However, I have already carefully considered this matter and prepared for it. There shouldn't be any problems with this." It wasn't difficult for him to see that Taoist Xian Che and the others had borrowed the help of a magic tool to enter the chaotic domain. It was already extremely fast to be able to refine two similar magic tools in such a short time. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be more. Even if someone came to Bu Shutian, it would be a clone at most. He had also left his consciousness clone there, so it wouldn't be much of a threat to Bu Shutian. Furthermore, because of external threats, it was impossible for the land of fortune behind the Qingshan sect to be left unguarded. Someone would definitely be left behind to guard it, and that person would most likely be the master of the place. Otherwise, once that existence that had destroyed everything came, he would be able to easily take this place away. Seeing that he was already prepared, Taoist Shunchang no longer had any doubts and flew out of Bu Shutian. Azure Saint and the others followed one after another. When the four of them arrived in the silence, they realized that it was just as Zhang Yan had said. That existence's qi activity was fluctuating. It was obvious that he was fighting with someone, and the collision of his dermic powers was so intense that it caused such a situation. They were also extremely surprised. There was actually someone who didn't hide when that existence came, and even dared to take the initiative to fight. At the same time, they also felt relieved. At the very least, that existence didn't have the mood to pay attention to them before the enemy was eliminated. At this moment, Zhang Yan was able to clearly sense that there was another peerlessly fierce aura that was intertwining and colliding with that existence. He was clearly unable to see who it was, yet it just so happened to give him a familiar feeling, and he couldn't help but fall into deep thought. On the other side, when Taoist Xian Che and that Daoran saw that the existence seemed to be stalled by someone, they thought that they could fight with Zhang Yan. However, they didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, there would be four fellow god refinement cultivators behind the ladder. Both of their expressions changed. Taoist Xian Che sneered and said, "You said that I led outsiders here, but I didn't expect that you would be in the same situation as well. I wonder how you have the face to say that?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "You're wrong. This matter is an internal matter between our sects, and I definitely won't let outsiders handle it. Even if I fight with the two of you, I won't ask for help from these people." When he spoke up to here, he looked at Taoist Xian Che and said, "I never had the intention to give the land left behind by the ancestral master to outsiders. These people are only here to avoid a disaster, and they're sheltering here with me. Unlike you, you actually gave such a place to others." Taoist Xian Che, however, didn't believe him. Although Zhang Yan said so, if they really fought, who knew if the others would take the initiative to help him? That Daoran secretly transmitted a message to him, "Fellow Taoist, there are 5 people on the other side, and there's no winning or losing in this battle. It's indeed not fellow Taoists' fault that we couldn't seize the land of fortune this time. We'll think of a way when we return. For now, it's better for us to leave this place and not alarm that existence. What they were most afraid of was that the commotion caused by the battle here would attract that existence's attention. If they were seen by that existence when they fled back, then the land of fortune that they were using as shelter would be discovered by that existence. Once they were targeted, it would be difficult for them to survive. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. This was a rare opportunity, and it just so happened that that existence was being held up. He might as well take down these two people first, and then gather the strength of everyone else to see if they could save Quan Dao and Xian Che. He said indifferently, "Fellow Taoist Xian Che, since you've given the land of fortune behind you to an outsider, then it's no longer related to you. However, I will find a way to take it back. However, if you're willing to cut ties with that existence, I can also protect you here." Taoist Xian Che glanced at him and said, "You don't have to say such words, sir. How can I betray an alliance?" A thought flashed in Zhang Yan's mind. Logically speaking, as they were of the same bloodline, he was more trustworthy than an outsider. However, it seemed like Taoist Xian Che had no intention of standing on his side. There was no such thing as a promise between spirit refinement cultivators. If Taoist Xian Che really valued this, he wouldn't have disregarded the arrangements left behind by the ancestral master. Therefore, there must be some kind of reason that forced him to follow these outsiders. He was only giving Taoist Xian Che one last chance out of consideration for the ancestral master. Since Taoist Xian Che was unwilling, then he couldn't be blamed. He immediately changed his mind, and a boundless wave of Wei Li pressed forward. In the blink of an eye, his transcendence energy was pushed up by several levels. Not only that, he also activated Bushtian's Wei Li at the same time, striving to suppress these two people in the shortest time possible. Chapter 2038. Just now, Zhang Yan could clearly see that Daoren and Xian Che's strength had yet to pass the stage of truth comprehension. Therefore, he didn't need anyone else to intervene. He could deal with the two of them with his own strength. Although he couldn't kill his fellow god refinement cultivators, he could use the Busha Heaven's Wei Li to suppress them. If this matter went smoothly, and he had a chance to take back the land of fortune behind the clear sync chaotic domain, it wouldn't be a problem even if he released the two of them. After all, it was useful to have more people to deal with the void separation tribulation. If they weren't willing to submit, he could just expel them into the void separation tribulation and let that existence finish them off. Xian Che and Daoren had been on high alert because they had suddenly entered the void separation tribulation. At this moment, when they suddenly felt Zhang Yan's magic power pressing down on them, the two of them hurriedly used their magic power and pushed the changes in the void separation tribulation, instantly lifting them up. The two of them originally thought that as long as the other four didn't intervene, it wouldn't be difficult for them to stop Zhang Yan even if he was stronger than them. As long as there was a chance, they could escape to the present world and no longer be entangled here. The two of them had calculated correctly, but they had still underestimated Zhang Yan's strength. Under this sudden collision, the outermost layer of transcendence energy actually collapsed upon contact, layer by layer collapsing. That vast and mighty force rushed into their inner circle in an instant. Doran's expression changed. He transmitted a message to Xian Che using his divine will. Fellow Taoist Xian Che, why is this person's magic power so different from what you said? Why is his magic power so strong? Could it be that fellow Taoist teacher is hiding something? Taoist Xian Che snorted. Usually, soul refinement cultivators would be able to sense each other's aura through the collision of their magic power, and they would also be able to see some of the other party's moves. However, once a cultivator passed the truth enlightenment stage, they would be able to restrain themselves, so he had no way of knowing Zhang Yan's background. Even though Zhang Yan wouldn't be able to understand him, it would be fine if his magic power was higher than Zhang Yan's, but if his magic power was weaker than Zhang Yan's, then he would be at a great disadvantage. Fortunately, although the cultivation methods passed down by the sects of the four great chaotic domains were different, He had tried to see the cultivation methods of the Qinsong branch after arriving in the chaotic domains. After a little deduction, he knew what it would be like after reaching a high level of cultivation. He believed that he had a way to deal with it. But now, Zhang Yan's method was completely different from the Qinsong school's cultivation method, and he couldn't find any flaws in it at all. This caused him to lose his greatest advantage. In this battle of pure magic power, the two of them were quickly defeated. They only had one last circle of magic power left to protect themselves. If they couldn't find a way, then perhaps they would be suppressed by Zhang Yan in a short while. Daoren saw that the situation was not good, so he didn't dare to hesitate any longer. He hurriedly called for the help of his magic artifact. Light flashed on his body, and a brilliant golden copper cauldron flew out. There were thousands of golden patterns on it, like surging waves. When the magic power collided with it, these patterns rippled and melted away layer by layer. Not only that, most of the Wei that came pouring over actually flowed back to where it came from. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He could immediately see that this magic artifact was very mysterious. It could defend and attack at the same time. Not only could it dissipate the attack, it could also borrow the enemy's power to counterattack. However, he was prepared for this. Since the two of them had good fortune fragments with them that could be used to refine magic tools, then they definitely had treasures with them. Especially since they controlled a land of good fortune, there might be treasures of good fortune hidden within. Now that he saw this item, it was indeed as he expected. The other party was not a treasure spirit like Chao Ying or Yi Han. Even if he used the Bu Shutian Weili to suppress it, it would at most shake the treasure. It wouldn't affect the owner too much, so he couldn't rely on the Weili to defeat the enemy. Just now, with just one collision, he immediately saw the strengths and weaknesses of this magic artifact. Although it could push back the enemy's power, when it was activated, it could only counter one force. However, he was using the Bu Shutian Weili and his own magic power at the same time. So even though the two of them had successfully blocked this wave of attack, they were still restrained by him and couldn't escape. Understanding this, he already had a plan. He once again used the Bu Shutian Weili to suppress it. At the same time, with a thought, a golden light flashed, and the Tai golden bead appeared. The moment the Bu Shutian Weili fell, it was blocked by the Pan Gui. This treasure was also amazing. It shook with golden patterns and firmly protected the two of them. Moreover, it once again pushed back the attacking force. Zhang Yan ignored this surging golden wave. Just as it was about to reach his body, a jade cup appeared out of thin air. The cup's mouth turned, and all the attacking force was swallowed. With the protection of this treasure, he could continuously send out his magic power. He wasn't afraid of being countered by the other party at all. Instead, because of this, the Pangui couldn't block the Tai golden bead. Taoist Xian Che and the old man hurriedly wanted to escape. Originally, after taking out the Pangui, they were prepared to use it to hold back the enemy and find an opportunity to escape. But the more they did so, the more they couldn't find an opportunity. Whether it was the magic artifacts in their hands or the power they could use, they were far inferior to Zhang Yan. They could defend one side, but they couldn't defend the other. At this moment, a sudden sense of danger flashed in their hearts, and they knew that the situation was bad. After a short while, they felt a great force fall on their bodies. They couldn't help but tremble and stiffen in place. After the Tai golden bead was shot out, there was no process at all. It directly fell on their magic power, and after it arrived, it would continue to attack them. This made it even more difficult for them to escape. If it wasn't for the protective magic artifacts refined by the creation fragments, they would probably have completely lost the ability to fight back. Seeing that the battle had progressed to this point, Zhang Yan understood that he had the situation under control. It wouldn't be difficult for him to take down the two of them as long as he fought steadily. In reality, if it wasn't for the fact that the two of them didn't have the will to fight and wanted to retreat first, and if they dared to fight him, it wouldn't be so easy for him to do this even if he couldn't change the result. But now, it was impossible for them to resist even if they wanted to. After a while, he raised his magic power again and again, and there was a huge gap between him and the two of them. Seeing that the time had come, he directed his mind and completely suppressed it. Even if Xianqi and Xianqi had treasures to defend themselves, they were already unable to endure the heavy burden from the continuous pressure. At this moment, when they were pressed down by this peerlessly powerful force, the magic energy and protection around their bodies finally collapsed completely, and they didn't have any ability to resist any longer. But at this moment, a wave of magic power appeared out of nowhere. Judging from its momentum, it seemed like it was trying to bring the two of them back. Zhang Yan sensed that there was a power very similar to Bu Shutian's Weili in this power, and he immediately realized that it was the cultivator who controlled the land of creation behind Qing Chintian. It was obvious that this person saw that the battle had reached a critical point, and thought that Zhang Yan had used up all his trump cards, so he chose this moment to cut into the battle. Zhang Yan didn't know what method this person used, but there was no warning when he attacked. If it was someone else, they might have succeeded, but Zhang Yan was experienced in battle, and he needed to be constantly on guard against that existence in this void, so even at this time, he didn't forget to guard against the outside world. At this moment, a golden bell rang in his mind, and the power that was attacking him immediately weakened. When it reached the inner circle, there was nothing left, and he used Bu Shutian's power to lightly knock against it. But the other party clearly didn't want to give up just like that. Suddenly, everything seemed to stop, and a blurry figure condensed. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that it was a Taoist whose face he couldn't recognize. The Taoist bowed to him and said sincerely, "Fellow Taoist, you're too polite. We've offended you today, so can you let these two fellow Taoists go? If they come back, I'll definitely restrain them and won't disturb you again. Moreover, the void-leaving tribulation is coming, and it's not appropriate for us to fight at this time." Zhang Yan could see that the person in front of him was a phantom formed from the Weili, and his true body was probably still hiding in the land of creation. His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't believe what he said at all. If spirit refinement cultivators were familiar with each other, then a promise would have some weight, but if they were enemies to begin with, then the promise wouldn't be trustworthy at all, and it would be normal for them to just turn around and throw it away. Moreover, the main reason why this person was plotting against the land of creation behind the four regions was to avoid that existence. With such a threat around, it wasn't something that they would really be unwilling to do just because they said they were. Now that he was at the last step, if he let these two people go, then what he had done today would be meaningless, and it would be impossible for him to find such an opportunity again. He immediately replied, "The place where you reside was originally left behind for Xianqi by the ancestor of this poor Taoist sect. There must be a reason why he chose to stay with the two of you. If the two of you had stayed there peacefully and not moved, this poor Taoist would naturally not have interfered too much. However, the two of you wanted more, so there is absolutely no possibility of reconciliation. Today, this poor Taoist has taken down these two people. I will personally visit your sect another day." After he finished speaking, he waved his sleeve, and the Taoists' figures suddenly shattered. They had communicated with each other through their consciousness. It seemed like they had talked for a long time, but in reality, it had only been an instant. At this moment, his gaze fell forward, and the endless Weili fell. Xianqi and Daoren disappeared at the same time, suppressing the two of them into Bu Su Tian. If he didn't agree to it, or if Bu Su Tian broke, they would never be able to come out again. Shen Chang and the others couldn't help but be shocked when they saw this scene. Not only did Zhang Yan easily take down two of his peers, but it was also because of Bu Su Tian's unfathomable Weili. Just now, if they were in his place, they would also be powerless to stop him. After Zhang Yan suppressed the two of them, he turned to look at the depths of the void. It seemed that this battle hadn't attracted that existence's attention, or that existence didn't have the time to pay attention to this place. However, this was in line with his intentions. He could take advantage of this time to do more things. First, he divided his attention to look around, trying to find the land of creation. It was very difficult to find these places amidst the boundless nothingness and the countless existences of life and death. Even that existence might not be able to do it. However, because of the previous collision with Xianqi and Xianqi's magic power, he could try to find the land of creation behind clear sync chaotic domain. This way, even if the chaotic domain and this place were closed, he would still be able to find it. Although this place was controlled, and it was difficult to break through it from the outside, like Bu Su Tian behind him, if there were any gaps that he hadn't made up for, he might be able to find an opportunity. Chapter 2039. With a thought, Zhang Yan prepared to absorb the auras left behind by the two of them and directly find Qin Chen's location. However, when he did so just now, he found that most of the auras left by the two had been erased or deliberately altered by someone else. If he followed this, he would definitely not be able to find anything in the end. Without a doubt, this was done by the Taoist just now. It seemed that the purpose of his arrival this time was not only to save the two, but also to prevent them from finding his hiding place. That was why he had erased their auras with a flip of his hand. This person's arrival this time was mostly due to some kind of artifact, and at the same time, he had used a portion of the power of creation. However, he did not leave any of his own auras behind. It could be said that he was ethereal and untraceable. Zhang Yan snorted coldly. This person thought that he had done it cleanly, but in reality, as long as he had really appeared, it was impossible for him to not leave any traces behind. In particular, this person had used a portion of the power of creation. For others, this kind of Wei might be very difficult to subdue, and it would be very difficult for them to find any clues, but for someone like him who was very familiar with the creation Wei, it might not be of much use. Of course, if this was all he was relying on, he might not be able to find the whereabouts of the land of creation. There was still a possibility that the other party had concealed it. Therefore, long before the two came out, he had already deduced where they were. Even if he did not have the clues in front of him now, he would just have to spend a little more effort, and it would not be a hindrance. After a little more deduction, a flash of light appeared in his eyes, and he looked in a direction. He immediately saw a place. It was somewhat similar to the land of creation behind the flowing chaotic territory, and it was slightly stronger, but it was still far from Bu Shutian's. He was able to sense that someone was looking at him as he looked in. That Taoist should have noticed his gaze as well, but he didn't show himself because of this. Instead, he lay dormant and didn't move. Obviously, he didn't want to expose too much about himself. He thought to himself. From the looks of it, this person had probably not passed the stage of understanding the truth. Otherwise, he would not have to worry about the fluctuations of his magic power, which would allow others to find out about him. However, he could not rule out the possibility that this person was doing this on purpose. He wouldn't jump to conclusions before seeing the person himself. Since he'd already found this place, he didn't continue looking because he was unable to do anything to this place of fortune. Fortunately, after the land of creation has been refined by someone, it is not impossible to seize control of it. It is just that it is very difficult. It depends on the skills of the person who controls it and whether there are any omissions that have not been remedied. Since this place was left behind by the great underworld ancestral master, there would definitely be traces of the ancestral master's aura. For example, Bu Shutian had such an aura in his body that even he couldn't erase. The other party was not a descendant of the great underworld ancestral master. As long as his cultivation did not surpass the great underworld ancestral master's magical power, he would not be able to do this. This was something that could be used. This place was not his main goal this time. He could come back to it in the future. If it was possible, he wanted to find the other two places of fortune. As long as he could immerse his will into those ownerless lands, he would be able to instantly turn those lands into his own when he was in the void. That way, he would have 3 blessed lands under his control. Not only would he be able to protect his fellow bloodlines, but he would also be able to borrow even more power from them. In just a blink of an eye, he had already found the place of fortune behind the drifting chaotic domain. Because he had left an avatar of his consciousness there, even though the door of 2 worlds was closed, he was able to find it in an instant. His consciousness had passed through billions of years in the fully chaotic domain, but it only took an instant for the outside world to be completely under his control. Now that he had obtained another place of fortune, he made up his mind. At the very least, he would not return empty-handed. As for the auspicious chaotic domain, It would be a little difficult because the two worlds were not close yet. If he couldn't find it this time, he could only wait for the next opportunity. After splitting a strand of his consciousness to calculate and search for it, he focused his attention on how to save Quan Dao and Bing Kong. He said to Shen Chang and the others, "Right now, that person is entangled with someone and is unable to care about the outside world. Just now, our battle has not attracted his attention. This is a rare opportunity. Why don't we try to find where Luan Fong and Bing Kong are? If we can save them, we can reduce that person's strength and also increase the number of people we can fight against that person." Shen Chang and the others all had extremely solemn expressions. They were not worried that they could not find the two people, but they were worried that if they found them, they might directly face that person. It should be known that Quan Dao and Bing Kong were inferior to them in terms of cultivation, but there was no fundamental difference. Even so, they were easily suppressed back then. If it was them, the result might not be much better. However, at this moment, no one objected. First, they were now under Zhang Yan's protection. Second, they all had a clear understanding of the current situation and knew that what they were doing now was undoubtedly very correct. Blindly hiding in Bushitian was the most negative thing to do. Taoist Qing Sheng especially agreed with this, and he was even more radical. He suggested, "That person is constantly invading the world, and his strength is constantly increasing. Now that there is a chance, we should find a way to save the two people. This way we can not only reduce his arrogance, but also increase our strength. Moreover, he is being held back by another Taoist, which means that the two people's strength is not much different. If we intervene now, we might have a chance to suppress him, and then this disaster can be solved." Taoist Shen Chang, however, was not so optimistic. He said, "No matter what, let's first see if we can save the two people. We can discuss the rest later. Also, we need to be as careful as possible when facing that person." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoists, don't worry too much. Although I have never met that person, I have seen his strength. Although he is unfathomable, he is not unstoppable. Even if that person comes to deal with us, I will use Bushitian's Weili to help you hide in Bushitian. As long as you are careful, there will be no problems." Everyone present had been to Bushitian. For them, this place was not just a place, but a place that was always next to them. As long as they got permission, they could hide in it with just a thought, unless they were captured before they noticed anything unusual. The four of them nodded. Hearing Zhang Yan's words, they felt much more at ease. They immediately tried to sense the whereabouts of Luan Fong and Bing Kong. In the silence, there was no such thing as distance. The clash of spiritual power, some could be seen now, and some could not be found a long time ago. However, regardless of whether they had fallen into eternal silence or not, there would always be some remnants left, just that they were very weak. Each of them had come into contact with Quan Dao and Luan Fong in the past. Now that they were tracing the traces of their spiritual powers, they were not completely clueless. Zhang Yan also calculated carefully. In his opinion, that person would not deliberately hide this because there was no need to. That person must be very happy to see them leave Bushutian and took the initiative to find them. If that person directly used his spiritual power to trap the two people, then there was a higher chance of saving them after finding them. However, if the two people were trapped in a place similar to a place of fortune, then they would not have the ability to save them. They could only do their best. The five of them worked together to calculate and soon found the location of Quan Dao and Luan Fong. However, they felt as if there was an invisible barrier between them that prevented their spiritual power from entering. This was not only because of the difference in spiritual power between the two sides, but also because of the difference in realm. Just one line was the difference between heaven and earth. As long as their spiritual power was not enough, then they would never be able to touch the other side. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. If he used Bushutian's spiritual power and his spiritual power, there was a possibility that he could open this door. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, there was an inexplicable sense of danger in his heart, as if it was not appropriate to do so. This immediately made him vigilant. Although he only needed one step to achieve his goal, after calming down and thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. He said, "Everyone, since we can't open this door, we will return. As long as Bushution's place of protection still exists, we will still have a chance." Seeing this, Xinqiang and the other three knew that they could not do anything. It would be best if they could retreat. After all, the threat of that person was always there. Zhang Yan made up his mind and was about to lead everyone back to Bushution. However, he sensed something and looked back. He saw a Taoist standing there with his back facing him. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. He could clearly see the other person, but he could not sense the other person's existence. At this moment, a ray of sword light suddenly flashed out from nothingness and split the chaos in a split second. The barrier that they were unable to pass through just now suddenly shattered and two surges of mana surged out. That Luan Fang and Bing Kong actually broke out from within. At the same time, an incomparably oppressive Weili suddenly appeared, as if it wanted to surround them. The Taoist merely had his back towards everyone as he flicked his finger. As his sleeve fluttered, a vast and grand sword light suddenly soared into the sky and instantly tore it apart. However, the sword light interweaved and collided with the mighty force in the surroundings, and it just happened to seem as if the workings of the heavens had been shattered, causing the rumbling of the sword to actually enter into the hearts of everyone present. The Taoist did not turn around and only said, "Fellow Taoist, you can save them and leave. Quickly." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Without hesitation, he waved his sleeve and immediately escorted Quan Dao, Luan Fang, and the other four people into Bushution. At this moment, he heard a voice that seemed to be coming from a boundless place. "The sword rises from the heart, slays all, and cleaves the heavens." Then, he saw a spiritual light in the shape of a sword pill suddenly appear in his mind. His heart moved, and he immediately gathered it into an unknown place. Just before entering Bushution, he looked again. The sword light and the mighty force were all gone, but in the silence, there was still a sword mark. Chapter 2040. Zhang Yan sensed that the two rippling auras were still colliding. He knew that the battle had not completely ended and was still ongoing. Because it involved a higher level, he could not sense it. However, he believed that the senior did not have a high chance of winning. If he could defeat that existence, then he would not have tried to rescue Quan Dao and Xinqiang. He could have waited until that existence was expelled before doing so, or he could have simply ignored it. Now that he had helped them, he guessed that the senior was probably trying to strengthen his own forces. In the future, when someone had accumulated enough strength, he could go over and help them to defeat that existence. However, regardless of whether that was the senior's intention, he had indeed helped them buy time. However, even if it was a battle between two people with similar strength, the slightest mistake could lead to failure. In order to help them this time, that Taoist must have paid a great price. In other words, the battle that was originally going to last for a long time would be shortened because of this. However, if he could reach the level where he could intervene before the battle ended, he might really be of great help. Thinking of this, he did not look anymore. He took a step forward and sank into the sky. At this moment, the people who had returned first were waiting there. Quan Dao and Xinqiang were the same. When they saw that Zhang Yan had returned, they hurriedly came up and bowed solemnly. They said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. If not for you, we would not have been able to return alive." Then the two of them bowed to Xinqiang and the others. "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for saving us this time." Zhang Yan said, "If the two of you want to thank someone, then thank that fellow Taoist. If not for him, we would not have been able to help the two of you escape from that place." Quan Dao and Xinqiang looked at each other. One of them said, "We seem to know about this person's background." Zhang Yan already had a relatively accurate guess about the identity of that person. He waved his hand and said, "Since that fellow Taoist did not reveal his true identity, there is no need to look into it. It is good that everyone knows, there is no need to say it out loud." Everyone nodded. Spirit refinement cultivators all had their own taboos. They could feel that that person had refused to turn around and only showed his back to them. It was not that he did not want to face them, but once he did so, something unfavorable or unexpected might happen to them. Before they understood the specific situation, it was best not to mention these things. Shunchang Taoist let out a long sigh and said, "In the past, I only knew that existence was powerful, but I didn't expect him to be this powerful. We were like babies before him, unable to fight back." Everyone was speechless. After this encounter, it could be said that they directly realized the gap between them. When the extremely oppressive Whaley appeared, everyone felt that they were utterly powerless to resist it, and it was even to the extent that it was extremely difficult for them to circulate their consciousness. It seemed as if they couldn't even teleport back. If it wasn't for that Taoist slashing the chaos with his sword, then not to mention rescuing the two of them, it was already not bad for them to be able to protect themselves. In reality, with Zhang Yan by their side, even if there was danger, he could still send everyone back in time and would not really be trapped in the outside world. However, the strength of the other party still made them feel a lingering fear. Taoist Qing Sheng's expression was solemn. The fellow Taoist who wielded his sword in the sky was extremely powerful, and he admitted that he was far inferior to him. However, even such a person could not defeat that existence. Moreover, this Taoist was currently fighting with that existence. However, if this Taoist was defeated, then the latter would be completely unrestrained, and his strength would definitely be stronger than before. At that time, how could they fight against him? Could it be that they were really going to hide here? Zhang Yan said, "If you don't want to wait for death, then you have to find a way to fight against that existence. Although Bu Xiutian can protect you for a while, as his power gradually increases, it may not be forever." Taoist Qing Sheng said, "Fellow Taoist is right. This time, being able to rescue the two of you is already a setback for the enemy. When there's a chance, we still have to find a way to stop him from succeeding. In short, we can't let him easily devour all of you." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Among everyone, Taoist Qing Sheng's thoughts were the most unfathomable. Moreover, he was pursuing the Tao within himself, and his ultimate goal was also similar to that existence. Similarly, before he achieved his goal, that existence would be the biggest obstacle on his path of Tao. Thus, at present, their goals were still the same. He turned to Quan Dao and said, "Previously, I promised the two of you to enter this place of protection. Today, I will fulfill my promise. The two of you can choose a place to stay here. In the future, when we fight against that existence, we will still need the two of you to help." "No, fellow Taoist is too serious. We will listen to fellow Taoist's arrangements. If you need our help, we will certainly comply." Quan Dao and Taoist Qing Sheng hurriedly replied. Even though Zhang Yan said that their escape this time had nothing to do with him just now, they understood in their hearts that if it wasn't for Zhang Yan bringing people to rescue them, how could they have been saved by that existence? Even if they could escape, they would not be able to enter the place of protection. Thus, they secretly remembered this favor in their hearts. Zhang Yan did not intend to settle everyone in Bu Xiutian. Instead, he wanted to separate them. After discussing with Taoist Shunchang and Boy Shunchang for a while, he arranged for the two of them to stay in the place of fortune in fully chaotic domain. That place was relatively weaker than Bu Xiutian, and the two of them did not have many thoughts about it, so they did not covet it. However, the world was unpredictable, and some things were not absolute. With his consciousness incarnation there, as long as such an intention appeared, he would immediately suppress it. As for the rest of the people, they still stayed there. If they could occupy the place of fortune behind fully chaotic domain in the future, he would also arrange for some people to enter. As long as he had Bu Xiutian in his hands, he did not have to worry about any accidents. After making all the arrangements, he separated from the others. Then, his consciousness moved and he arrived in an empty world. After he took Taoist Xianche and Daoren into Bu Xiutian, they were suppressed here. The two of them could not cultivate here, nor could they come into contact with anything in the outside world. They could only barely use their magic power to maintain themselves. Zhang Yan looked at the two of them. At this point, as long as he was willing, he could slowly cut off all ties with the outside world and force them into eternal silence one day. However, considering that Taoist Xianche was a disciple of the great underworld patriarch, it was inconvenient for him to do so. Moreover, the other person might be of some use, so he left him here for now. When the two of them saw him, their expressions were unfriendly, but there was nothing they could do. They could only stay silent. Zhang Yan said, "The two of you should stay here. If I can deal with the threat from beyond the sky, it will be the day when the two of you will be free. However, if the two of you are willing to fight against the tribulation of leaving the sky, I can consider it and let the two of you out first." If the two of them were willing to fight that existence together, he could let them out. Even though the promise of the spirit refinement realm could not be kept, it was not up to them in the void. Daoren was very unwilling. He sneered a few times and said, "The outcome of the battle has not been decided. The place of fortune is still in the hands of our fellow Taoist. Don't you think it is too early for you to say that?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "The outcome of the battle is between me and that fellow Taoist. It is not up to you to decide. If I see that fellow Taoist, I will invite him here to meet the two of you." When he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and left. When he left, the two of them suddenly felt that they were trapped by a whaley. Not long after, their consciousness also became dizzy. Since it was a suppression, Zhang Yan naturally would not let them have an easy time. Moreover, Bu Shutian was not without loopholes. If he gave them too much time to think and calculate, it might give them a chance to escape. Therefore, he increased the pressure so that they could only fight with all their strength and could not rest for even a moment. Under such circumstances, they could not do anything else, which could save them a lot of trouble. After Zhang Yan left that place, he returned to the Qinghuan Palace and sat down on the praying mat. Then, with a turn of his spirit, the item that the Taoist left for him appeared. It was an item shaped like a sword pill. It looked extremely bright and did not contain any impurities. It seemed to be able to repel any external force. Just by touching it, one would feel that all methods were silent and the whaley stopped. There was a burst of emptiness, and it was very difficult to see what was inside. After trying to examine it, he knew that with his current cultivation, he would not be able to truly understand the use of this item. If he used Bu Shutian's whaley, he might be able to forcefully push it forward. However, after thinking about it, he knew that it was not appropriate to do so. After thinking about it, he felt that it was better to wait until his cultivation improved before he could understand this item. With a turn of his spirit, he hid the item and calculated. He found that as the three chaotic domains separated from the land of creation, the last one, Jiyuan chaotic domain, was about to connect with the land of creation behind it. The door of two realms could open at any time. He was also determined to obtain this place, but if he wanted to obtain it like the land of creation in the flowing chaotic domain, he would have to enter the void again. This time, they had gone out with the help of the Taoist, so that existence could not do anything to them. However, if they went out again, it would be very difficult to say. If they were targeted, they might not be able to smoothly escape. He thought for a moment. If the timing was right, it was not impossible to achieve this. However, before that, he should first sink his consciousness avatar into the land of creation. Thinking of this, his eyes flashed. This time, another door of two realms had appeared. He did not know what choice the Taoist behind the Qingchen chaotic domain would make. If that person did not have a shocking opportunity, he could only stay in the land of creation and not dare to come out. He would also have to worry about being discovered by that existence. Overall, he was at an absolute disadvantage. The other party should understand that it was impossible to win just by maintaining the current situation. Sooner or later, the boundary would be taken back by him. However, if he managed to seize the good origin region first, then he would be able to change the current situation greatly, and he might even be able to go against him. A single clone was clearly not enough to do that, unless he came here in person. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. This time, he would wait for the other party to come. If he could suppress this person into Bu Shutian, then the entire four domains would be in order. At that time, he could focus on cultivation. Chapter 2041. Zhang Yan sat in the middle of the bushy sky. A long time passed before he realized it. At some point he sensed something in his heart. He opened his eyes and saw that the door behind the clear sync chaotic domain was gradually closing. The auspicious chaotic domain was very close to the domain behind him. He only needed to use his magic power to push the door open. He didn't hesitate. With a thought, a spiritual light appeared in front of him. However, he only separated a wisp of his consciousness to go in. His main body was still outside. He wanted to see if the Taoist in the clear sync chaotic domain would choose to attack at this time. If the Taoist didn't come by the time the door closed, then he could only wait and deal with him later. What surprised him was that not long after his consciousness incarnation entered, he found a palace that was very similar to the Kuan residence. The primordial underworld founding ancestor had split the 4 chaotic domains into 4 different places of fortune, and every single one of them was occupied by a direct disciple. The most ideal situation would be for every disciple to possess a place of fortune and attain their own accomplishments. But this was actually impossible. Refining the spirit depended on both talent and luck. It was extremely difficult to achieve. Otherwise, the great underworld patriarch wouldn't have entrusted the oracle to Taoist Xianche. The auspicious chaotic domain was supposed to be left to Taoist Sun Yu by the ancestral master. He was the one who had followed the great underworld ancestral master the longest among the 4 disciples, and his cultivation was the highest in the original 4 chaotic domains. Therefore, Luo Zhan and Miao Yu attached great importance to his opinion. Zhang Yan didn't see anything left behind by the great underworld patriarch in the flowing slip chaotic domain. But it was hard to say here. This palace might have been passed down by the patriarch. Just as he was about to investigate deeper, his heart stirred. He turned to look and saw a ray of light coming from the clear sync chaotic domain and spreading into the auspicious origin chaotic domain. Then, it suddenly gathered, and a Taoist covered in a robe appeared. This person's facial features were shrouded in a layer of light mist. Even his aura was blurry, making it difficult to distinguish his origin. When Zhang Yan saw this, he guessed that this person was perhaps famous in the past and knew many of his peers. Otherwise, there was no need to hide himself. Of course, there was also a smaller possibility, which was that this person's original cultivation method was like this. This time, this person was clearly prepared to fight with him, so he also came here with his true body. He must have used a lot of the power of creation here, as well as some ritual implements to achieve this. After all, the land of creation behind this person could not be compared to Bu Shutian's. Otherwise, this person would not have tried so hard to take this place. But what surprised him was that this person had already passed the enlightenment stage. He didn't know whether it was the last time, or he had already passed long ago and deliberately showed weakness to the enemy. The 2 sides stood there for a long time, and then the Taoist first said, "May I ask how my 2 friends are?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "These 2 are still here. If you are worried, why don't you visit them in person?" The Taoist said, "You must be joking. I don't dare to go to your place, just like you don't dare to come to mine." Zhang Yan smiled. Now that he was going to go to the opponent's home ground, he really didn't have the confidence to win. In any case, the opponent was also the master of a place of fortune, and was much more powerful than his peers who had also passed this stage. However, what he said last time about paying a visit was not a lie. He would do it sooner or later. When the 2 blessed places of Fuli and Jiyuan could be used by him, he would have enough advantages. As long as he had enough power, he could try to break into the place where the other party was without waiting for the door to open. He didn't want the existence in the nothingness to find this place first, which meant that this place of fortune would be lost. Only when he had enough places of fortune in his hands, then he would have the capital to fight against the opponent. At this time he asked, "How should I address you, Your Excellency?" The Taoist said, "I don't want to deceive you, but I can't tell you my Taoist name now. Before I became Taoist, I had a name called Sky Reaching." When Zhang Yan heard this, he was even more certain of his previous judgment. He said, "Fellow Taoist towering firmament, if you can withdraw from that land of fortune and return it to our hands, I can make the decision and grant you a place to stay." Taoist Sky Reaching snorted and said, "That's just living under someone else's roof. From then on, I can only listen to Your Excellency's orders." Why don't you consider my suggestion? However, I can take a step back and not ask for those 3 places of fortune. As long as you can give me 2, I can become your ally. From then on, we will advance and retreat together. What do you think, fellow Taoist? Zhang Yan glanced at him and said indifferently, I said long ago that this place was passed down by the ancestral master, so I definitely won't let it fall into the hands of an outsider. Taoist Sky Reaching said meaningfully, since fellow Taoist said that, it means that you don't know my origin. In fact, it can be said that I have a legitimate reason to take this place. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Very few soul refinement cultivators would pretend to be their master because they couldn't. He didn't know how Taoist Xianche's place of fortune fell into this person's hands, but if what he said was true, then this might be the reason. However, there was one thing that he didn't deny. He had called this person an outsider earlier. Since it was a legitimate reason, why would he use another identity? Wouldn't it be unnecessary? Therefore, although they might have some history, their relationship couldn't be too deep. However, since he had already said that, he didn't mind asking, then, may I ask what is the relationship between you and me? The Taoist smiled as if he had no intention of revealing the answer. Zhang Yan didn't mind. He said, since you don't want to speak frankly, then there's nothing for us to say. Let's decide the winner with our magic power. As soon as he finished speaking, he released a vast amount of magic power and pressed down on the Taoist Sky Reaching Elder. He believed that the best way to fight against someone of the same generation was to use magic power. If he was stronger than his opponent, then he would be able to gain the upper hand. Taoist Sky Reaching Elder didn't show any weakness. He seemed to want to measure the true depth of Zhang Yan's strength, so he also spread his magic power and surged forward fiercely. When their magic power collided, the scene of the last time Zhang Yan fought Xianche and Xianche was repeated. The outer layer of Taoist Sky Reaching Elder's magic power collapsed one after another, and he was forced back like an ebbing tide. When Zhang Yan saw this, he didn't hold back and continued to push his magic power. Although he didn't think that he could defeat his opponent in one go, he naturally wouldn't let go of his advantage. However, at this time, he felt that he couldn't use all of his power. In fact, a part of it was missing. Taoist Sky Reaching Elder's magic power couldn't be said to be weak. In fact, it was far stronger than Taoist Xianche and Daoren. However, it was impossible to do this by relying on himself. The only way was to borrow a part of his power from the Land of Fortune. This person's control over the Land of Fortune had obviously reached an extremely profound level. If he wanted to defeat this person, he would have to destroy the Land of Fortune in one go. However, this was obviously very difficult to do. Although Zhang Yan was Bu Su Tian's master, he wasn't Bu Su Tian himself. If he could completely use the Land of Fortune, then let alone deal with this person, he probably wouldn't have to fear even that existence who could destroy everything. He thought to himself, looks like if I want to seize the Land of Fortune, I either have to go back to the original method of combining the 3 territories, or I have to do something from the inside. Although Taoist Sky Reaching Elder's powerful attack had been nullified, he hadn't been able to turn the situation around. By the same logic, he could only rely on the Land of Fortune to protect himself, but he couldn't counterattack. Logically speaking, he had no chance of winning if the battle continued, but he still persisted. It wasn't difficult for Zhang Yan to notice that his opponent didn't have a strong will to fight. He was just stalling for time. As the battle grew longer and longer, he eliminated many possibilities, and he could more or less guess what his opponent could do next. The two of them fought for a long time. The Origin Realm was shaken by their magic power, and it seemed like it was about to leave the Land of Fortune. The Gate of 2 Realms also showed signs of closing. At this moment, Taoist Sky Reaching Elder's aura suddenly surged. This time, he didn't seem to care about his own defense, and he used most of the Land of Fortune Whaley he could mobilize to rush toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan understood that if the other party wanted to make a move, this would be the moment. However, he couldn't completely ignore this power, so he cautiously used his magic power to neutralize the attack. Then his magic power surged, and he used the power of good fortune that he didn't have time to use to suppress Taoist Skirich, trapping him within. At this point, it was usually impossible for a person to escape, but he knew that things weren't so simple. His opponent wouldn't put himself in danger. Sure enough, Taoist Sky-Reaching Elder said, "Fellow Taoist is indeed brilliant. Since I've come here today, I won't waste any more time with you." As soon as he finished speaking, a crystal ring flew out, and in a flash, he disappeared from the magic power, leaving only the crystal ring floating on the ground. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. This situation was somewhat similar to how Chao Ying's Dharmakaya disappeared. He looked toward the gate of two realms. It was completely closed, but just now, his opponent must have sent his consciousness incarnation into it. He waved his hand and took the crystal ring. After a brief examination, he found that this magic treasure was interesting. If he wasn't mistaken, this item should have a main one and an auxiliary one. The spiritual vigor flowed back and forth between the two treasures. The main ring was left in the land of fortune, and the auxiliary ring was carried by the master. When the spiritual vigor flowed into the main ring, no matter how far the master was, it would bring back the person who carried the auxiliary ring immediately. However, this was not without a price. In order to resist his magic power, the auxiliary ring would stay here in place of the master. It seemed that Taoist Sky-Reaching Elder had put in a lot of effort for this, even letting half of the magic treasure fall into his hands. However, if he was at a disadvantage in a direct confrontation, why would he think that he could win in a battle of incarnations? His mind changed. Judging from his previous words, could it be that he knew about the mysteries of the palace? He smiled faintly and kept the crystal ring. Since he could predict his opponent's actions, he was prepared. He just had to see what his opponent was going to do. Chapter 2042. Zhang Yan had returned to Qinghuan Palace, and as usual, he began to practice the inner and outer seeking technique. Whether it was to refine the four lands of fortune or to fight against that existence, he needed to be more powerful than he was now. There was nothing better than entering the second stage. Although a cultivator had passed the enlightenment gate and passed the most difficult hurdle of climbing the second stage, reaching this realm was not something that could be achieved overnight. He still needed to put in a lot of effort. For now, he could only rely on himself to slowly accumulate strength, just like when he was comprehending in Busu Heaven. He took out the crystal ring left behind by Taoist Sky-Reaching, and with a thought, he returned it to a creation fragment. To seek Tao from the outside, he needed to comprehend this item and use the great Tao to reflect himself. Although he had the entire Busu Heaven and the floating lands of fortune, this item seemed to have little effect on him. However, a drop of water could form a river, and sand could form a tower. Even if the effect was minimal, it could still be used to improve. However, looking at the item in his hand, he thought of a problem. Creation fragments were not that easy to find. Qing Xing, Shen Chang, and the others had searched for a long time, but in the end, they only found a few fragments. It was obvious that it was not easy. However, Taoist Sky-Reaching and the others did not hesitate to refine it into a magic tool that could only be used once. This situation showed that he might have a lot of fragments in his hands. If it was accumulated over a long period of time, it would be easy to deal with. However, if it was taken from somewhere else or simply inherited the remains of others, then things would become very complicated. He could not help but think that even though Daoren was trapped, he still spoke arrogantly and was very unconvinced. Taoist Sky-Reaching either had some tricks up his sleeve, or he had some unknown backing. Combined with the previous words of this person must have a lot of secrets. However, now that the door of the two realms was closed, he would not know what would happen next before he found the true location of the creation lands. In the best-case scenario, his consciousness incarnation would successfully refine this place. Then, with the creation lands of the three realms in hand, he would be able to take over the last place. However, if he was disturbed and failed, then he could only wait for the next time the door of the two realms opened. In the creation lands of the creation lands of the creation lands, Zhang Yan's consciousness incarnation sensed that before the door of the two realms closed, Taoist Sky-Reaching's consciousness incarnation also appeared here. However, after entering this place, Taoist Sky-Reaching's consciousness incarnation did not immediately challenge him. Instead, he quickly went into hiding. Taoist Skyreaching's creation lands of the creation. However, he believed that if this person's strength could not be increased, then this method would be of no help to him in controlling this place of fortune. Because once their consciousnesses sank into the depths of the place of fortune, there would definitely be conflict, and at that time, he would still be able to find this person. If this was not Taoist Skyreaching's will, then Yun Shen's Yan would his consciousness would Yan's domain. This was probably related to the secrets of this land of fortune. Aside from the inexplicable origin that Taoist Skysplit had mentioned, it was more likely that Taoist Skysplit had obtained this information from Taoist Shen Che. Moreover, this possibility was even higher. After thinking about this, Zhang Yan changed his mind. In the next moment, he arrived in front of a palace that looked like the Kuan residence. What Taoist Skirich was after might be this place. This palace was extremely mysterious. Although he could see it, he could not sense its location. It was as if this place did not exist to him. This piqued his interest. After some calculations, he discovered that this palace was closely related to the natives of this place. Living creatures would be born in places where spiritual vigor was nurtured. There was no exception to the boundless spiritual vigor of the land of creation. The native creatures here also had a Taoist lineage. Normally, this generation would join hands to guard this palace, keeping a close watch on the door. Every year, it would open once, and only cultivators who had made great contributions could enter. Since they had an indescribable connection with this palace, once these people were gone, they would no longer be able to enter the palace. Therefore, if he wanted to enter, he could only wait until then. Right now, there was still more than half a year until the next opening. He could enter this place by changing the memories of these natives, but after thinking about it carefully, he did not do so. Instead, he decided to wait. Half a year passed quickly. Another group of cultivators gathered in front of the main hall. After paying their respects, one of them walked out and walked towards the palace. Just now, he reached the steps of the hall, and the door opened with a loud bang. Zhang Yan glanced at him, waved his sleeve, and walked in. Logically speaking, no one present should be able to sense his presence, but he suddenly felt something. He looked in a direction and saw a boy standing there. His eyes were black and white, and when he saw Zhang Yan looking over, he revealed a look of surprise. He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "May I ask if this Grand Supreme is Senior Brother Sun Yu?" Zhang Yan could already see clearly that this boy had no past or future, as if he had been deliberately concealed. However, he was not a living person, but a manifestation of the array spirit. Since he said the two words, Sun Yu, there was no doubt that he was related to the great underworld patriarch. He said, "I'm not Tao Master Sun Yu, but I'm from the same sect as him." The Taoist boy said, "So this Grand Supreme is also a disciple of the founding master. I believe the Grand Supreme is also here for this palace." He turned his body sideways and bowed. "This palace opens and closes once a year. Please enter, Grand Supreme." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and walked. Soon he arrived at the hall. After looking around, he saw that there were many mysterious patterns on the walls. The native cultivator who came in first was sitting inside, comprehending the patterns. However, he could not sense the two of them. He did not pay much attention to it and continued walking with the boy. Soon, they passed the main hall and arrived in front of a thick wall. The Taoist boy said, "This is where the inner palace is." Zhang Yan asked, "What's in here?" The Taoist boy shook his head and said, "I don't know either. I'm only responsible for guarding and have never entered the inner palace. If the Grand Supreme wants to enter, you need to take out a token." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He had made some preparations before coming here. One was the secondary seal of the Duzhen Hall Master, and the other was the secondary seal of the sect master that he borrowed from Taoist Sun Yu. Anyone who had this was equivalent to the sect master of the Jiyuan sect coming in person. He had always thought that the place of creation behind the Jiyuan chaotic domain had a deep relationship with the Jiyuan sect. If he had Taoist Sun Yu's seal, it might be helpful to him. He might have to use it here. With a thought, a jade seal flew out. However, it was not the secondary seal of the Jiyuan sect master, but the seal of the Qinsong School's Duzhen Hall master. He decided to try it first to see if he could open the door. If it did not work, he would use it to exchange for the secondary seal of the Jiyuan sect master. After the seal made a circle in the air, it suddenly stopped. A spiritual light bloomed from it and fell on the wall of the hall. After a while, it seemed to melt, revealing a door that could be used to enter and exit. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. It seemed that the ancestral master's attitude towards the younger generation was not obviously biased. It was very likely that he treated everyone equally. Whoever found this place would be the lucky chance of that person. He wanted to see what was inside. The Taoist boy was happy to see the door open. He looked inside and said, "Senior brother, please come in." Zhang Yan walked inside and found that it was empty except for a shrine platform in the middle. There seemed to be something on it, but he did not immediately go up to take it. Instead, he sensed it and said, "Is this the end?" The Taoist boy said, "Yes." If the Grand Supreme wants to take anything else, you need to go to another palace. Zhang Yan said, "Oh, there is another place?" The Taoist boy said, "Yes, there are 2 palaces. One is above the water, and it is managed by this Taoist boy. It is called Chasing Sun. The other is below the water, and it is called Chieftain Yin. It is managed by a brother of mine. However, that palace needs the keepsake left behind by the ancestral master. Just now, it would not have appeared otherwise." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. The other palace was a little unexpected. It seemed that Taoist Skysplit's purpose for coming here was related to this. When he thought up to this point, the shrine platform shook and the item flew down. On the other side, Taoist Skysplit's consciousness incarnation had found a large waterfall. He took out a jade pendant from his sleeve and raised it high. Then he bowed to the waterfall 3 times. When he finished bowing, he found himself inside a wide palace. A look of joy appeared on his face. He formed a hand seal and summoned a child. The child bowed to him and said, "Are you senior brother Xianche?" Taoist Skysplit waved his sleeve and the jade pendant flew out. It landed in front of the child and said, "Fellow Taoist Xianche won't be able to come for the time being. Bring me to the rear hall." The Taoist boy didn't dare to disobey. He led Taoist Skysplit to the rear hall. The jade pendant flew into the air and opened a door. Taoist Skysplit walked into the room and looked at the item placed inside the shrine platform. In reality, occupying this land of fortune wasn't his true goal. He had come for this item. What kind of treasure was this? It couldn't be used in battle, it couldn't be used for protection, and it didn't seem to be of much help in fighting against that existence. But judging from the current situation, it could be considered a supreme treasure. This item could help a cultivator sense the essence of fortune. To be sure, a cultivator could use it to find more places of fortune. In fact, he knew very well that even if he had this thing, it wouldn't be easy to accomplish such a thing. Because the world was constantly changing, the land of fortune was constantly shifting. At most, it would slightly increase the chances of success. But even so, it was already pretty good. If he couldn't seize this land of fortune, then he might be able to rely on this to find a way out. He stretched out his hand and gestured, and the object on the shrine platform flew down and landed in his hand. But before he had the time to be happy, his expression sank, and he flipped it around a few more times. A trace of shock and anger appeared on his face, and he suppressed his voice and said, "Why is there only half?" Chapter 2043. Zhang Yan looked at the magic artifact in his hand with a profound gaze. Because this place of fortune had originally been left for Tao Master Sun Yu, he had speculated that the great underworld patriarch had left behind some kind of opportunity to guide him to spirit refinement. If that was the case, it would not be of much use to him, but after obtaining it he could return it to Tao Master Sun Yu. If he could obtain another person of the same lineage, he would naturally be very happy. However, even with such an item, it would be extremely difficult for Tao Master Sun Yu to reach the upper realm. He could only rely on his own luck. However, if he could find a powerful magic artifact used by spirit refinement cultivators, then this trip would not have been in vain. In order to fight against that person, he would not mind anything that could be of help, even if it was very weak. Moreover, Taoist Skysplit's consciousness clone was here. Even if he himself was useless, he could not let this person obtain it. However, after observing it, he found that his previous guesses were all wrong. This was something that looked like a long shaft, but there was a gap at the top that seemed to be a mortise and tenon. Clearly, what he saw here was not the entire thing. Even though it was only a part of it, based on his senses, he could infer that it was used to help cultivators find places of fortune. However, he was cautious about how useful it was. But where was the other part? He raised his head. Apart from this item, there was nothing else in the Sun Chaser Palace. This meant that the other half might very well be in the other palace that the Tao Child had mentioned. He pondered for a moment, then put the item away and asked the Tao Child a few more questions. He could confirm that in the world that he knew of, apart from these two palaces, there were no other items left behind by the patriarch. He thought about it, and in an instant, the memories of the countless native beings here, as well as the changes in the heavens, were reflected in his mind. However, just as the Tao Child had said, there was nothing else worth investigating. When he thought about Taoist Skysplit's secretive actions, he was almost certain that this person was heading for Crowning Palace, and his goal might be the long shaft. Although he did not have the token and could not go there, if Taoist Skysplit discovered that he had only taken a part of it, he should be able to guess that the other half was in this palace. Unless he gave up, he would definitely come looking for him. In that case, all he had to do was wait for him to come. With that thought in mind, he ordered the guard boy to leave on his own. Then, he sat down cross-legged in the hall, and his consciousness entered the depths of this land of fortune. Regardless of whether it was as he had guessed, Towering Firmament would have to wait until the gate of the two realms reopened if he wanted to bring out what he had obtained. However, if he could take control of this place before then, not only would he be able to reconnect the two realms, he would also be able to kill the clone at any time. As soon as he entered this land of fortune, he had sensed the presence of an additional Whaley. It wasn't difficult to tell that it had been left behind by the great underworld ancestral master. Anyone who tried to take control of this place would find it obstructing them if they couldn't get along with it. On the contrary, if he were to go with the flow, he might be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. With a thought, the deputy sect master seal that Taoist Sun Yu had given him appeared. As soon as the seal appeared, it floated in the air for a moment, and light immediately shone down on his divine will. In an instant he felt a sense of clarity. Just now, the barrier between him and this world had disappeared. His divine will and magic power flowed smoothly like jade beads. At this moment, he looked down and vaguely saw the location of the origin route in this land of fortune. He immediately understood that this place was indeed a fortuitous encounter left for Taoist Sun Yu. Because whether it was in Bu Su Tian or the land of fortune behind the flowing muddy territory, the ancestral master didn't leave any traces behind. Only this place was guarded by the formation spirit and clearly mentioned his disciple's name. Perhaps Taoist Xian Che could be considered one of them. However, for some unknown reason, the latter didn't follow the ancestral master's instructions. However, this shouldn't be because the ancestral master favored his disciple, Sun Yu. He believed that the real reason was that the ancestral master had made preparations for the rest of the land of fortune to fall into the hands of others. Once such an outcome occurred, this land of fortune would be quickly taken over by his disciples, and it would become the last place to protect their descendants. With the ancestral master's Whaley help, he could now directly see where the origin route was. He only needed to find a way to fuse it into his body, and the speed of refinement would be many times faster. Perhaps he would be able to completely control this land of fortune in a few years. If Taoist Skysoar still hadn't appeared by then, he could only take him down. Inside the crowned Yin Palace, Taoist Skysoar walked around the hall and confirmed that only half of the magic artifact in his hand was there. He also thought that the other half must be in another palace. However, he didn't dare to go there now because he knew very well that there was no reason for Zhang Yan not to notice such a large area. Zhang Yan must have already occupied that area before he did, and perhaps he had already obtained the other half of the magic artifact. After thinking about this, he quickly calmed down. He looked at his hand, and the long scroll in his hand immediately disappeared. He had stored it into his divine will. Even though it was only half, it could still be used. He didn't believe that Zhang Yan wouldn't be tempted after seeing the function of this item. Right now, he only needed to hide until the door of 2 realms opened again, and he could use his divine will to send this item back. At that time, he would be able to propose an exchange or other conditions. In reality, if he was here, he definitely wouldn't make such a compromise. He would definitely stake everything on one throw and directly try to seize it. Logically speaking, the consciousness incarnation of a soul refinement cultivator wasn't completely the same as the main body, but they were still very similar. However, because of his own cultivation technique, the incarnation's way of thinking wasn't completely the same as the main body. This shouldn't have been a problem. As long as his main body was still there and their consciousness was connected, he could turn it to the right path that he agreed with. However, the door of 2 realms was closed, and they were separated from each other, so he could only let the incarnation act on its own. Soaring Heaven's consciousness incarnation originally thought that he could wait until the door of 2 realms opened again. However, after waiting for a few years, he was horrified to find bursts of pressure coming from his surroundings, as if they were rejecting him. This situation was clearly telling him that this place of creation was about to be controlled by someone. He was immediately surprised and bewildered, and he thought, how can it be so fast? Even though he knew that if he allowed Zhang Yan to do things here, this day would come sooner or later. If he didn't stop him, it would take at least tens of thousands of years. There was no reason to see the result in just a few years. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Unless Zhang Yan had some kind of token like him, it was highly possible. His expression darkened. If that was the case, he had to go and stop Zhang Yan right now. Otherwise, when Zhang Yan became the master of this place, not only would he not be able to escape, but he would also not be able to give away that half of his artifact. Thinking to there was a flash of light, and he left Crown Moon Palace. He arrived in front of Sun Chasing Palace and walked in until he arrived at the back of the palace. Zhang Yan had been sitting there the entire time. When he sensed Soaring Heaven's arrival, he shook his sleeves and stood up. He slowly turned around and said to the person, "Fellow Taoist, you've finally come. I have been waiting for you for a long time." Soaring Heaven looked at him and said in a low voice, "Just now, I've come here. Outsiders can only enter through the hands of the natives, so why don't you kill all the living beings here? That way, I won't be able to come here, and I won't be able to stop you." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "It doesn't matter whether you come here or not, it won't affect the overall situation. I don't need to do something so unimportant." The great underworld ancestral master might have casually placed the restrictions on the natives, but as a junior, out of respect for the wise sages, there was no need for him to destroy it. Moreover, the battle between spirit refinement cultivators wasn't a small matter, and if they fought in the palace, it wouldn't affect the outside world. Taoist Skirich coldly snorted. With every passing moment, Zhang Yan's control over this land of good fortune grew a little deeper. He didn't dare to delay any longer. Multicolored light scattered from his body as his magic power surged out. Zhang Yan stood there without moving. He activated his magical power and faced it head-on. With a loud noise, the entire palace swayed. However, all of the power was restrained here, unable to shake the world in the slightest. Soaring Heaven was at a disadvantage as soon as the battle began. He felt that the pressure coming from the other side not only contained Zhang Yan's magic power, but also the Wei of this land of fortune. This meant that Zhang Yan could use the power of this place to a certain extent. He immediately knew that he had no chance of winning, and that defeat was only a matter of time. However, he did not feel embarrassed because he was forced to a dead end. Instead, he threatened, "Have you ever thought that if I spread my divine intent and magic power out of this place, that existence might notice this place? If that happens, even if I can't occupy this place, you won't be able to obtain it either." Zhang Yan's expression did not change at all. He said indifferently, "You can try, sir. Indeed, if that existence in the void sensed this place, Because this place was still ownerless, there was a chance that it would be devoured. However, this did not mean that he could not stop it. Although the other side still had some strength left, if he wanted to send his magic power and even his divine intent out of the world, he would have to see if soaring heaven agreed or not. What's more, he was certain that the other side would not dare to do so. This was because this consciousness incarnation was condensed by the main body and not formed by magic power rippling into the world. So, once it entered the world, that existence would notice this place, but it would also be easier to connect to the main body's location and expose itself. As expected, soaring heaven had misgivings and did not dare to do so. After a few breaths, under the heavy pressure, his magic power was gradually exhausted. At the last moment, he suddenly laughed and said, "Sir, don't think that you've won. If I can't obtain it, then don't even think about obtaining it." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure suddenly dissipated, and all traces of him entering this world were instantly wiped clean. Zhang Yan stared at the place where towering firmament had disappeared and fell into deep thought. At this moment, he could not sense anything left behind by towering firmament. Combined with his last words, it was clear that towering firmament had used some unknown method to hide the item. Chapter 2044. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. He didn't mind losing these things. It was fine as long as he didn't let Taoist Skysoar take them. No matter where he put the half-artifact, it was still in this land of creation. He could try to find it after he took control of this place. There was no need to worry about it for now. He made up his mind and immersed his consciousness into the depths of this world. Because he had seen the origin heart, with the help of the great underworld patriarchs Whaley, it only took him a few months to completely refine this place. The entire land of creation was under his control. It was just that the great underworld patriarchs Whaley hadn't completely melted away. This was normal. There were many foreign powers in Bushutian that hadn't been erased yet. However, this didn't stop him from becoming the master of this place. Now, he could try to find that half-artifact. He spread his consciousness and instantly looked through all the worlds of creation. He didn't miss the hidden crown Een Palace either. However, he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Although he didn't find it, he was sure that Taoist Skysoar had hidden it with the help of the great underworld patriarchs Whaley. Otherwise, it was impossible that he couldn't find it. When he thought about the token to open the Forbidden Palace that the Taoist child had mentioned, he already had an idea. Taoist Skysoar probably didn't know that if he borrowed the great underworld patriarchs Whaley, Taoist Sun Yu's seal would be the most important thing in this world. Even if he obtained something from Taoist Xian Che, it would still be useless. He spread his sleeves and took out the Ji Yuan sect master's seal again. He then focused his consciousness on it. A moment later, he sensed something in his heart. He turned his consciousness and instantly escaped into an unknown place. As soon as he arrived, he saw several objects floating around. The most eye-catching among them was a jade pendant. He only needed a glance to recognize that it was a token of the same bloodline. Before Taoist Skysoar's consciousness incarnation collapsed, he must have used this jade pendant as a guide to hide these things. The second object floating here was a withered branch. It wasn't refined from a fragment of good fortune, nor was it a magic treasure. A layer of lustrous light revolved around it, preventing external forces from entering it. Zhang Yan could sense that this thing was extremely fragile. If he tried to forcibly peer into it, or even try to determine its past and future, it would most likely collapse. He didn't know why Taoist Skyhire had left it here, but logically speaking, it would have been better to bring a magical artifact with him than this thing. He pondered for a moment. Since this thing posed no threat, there was no need to worry about it for now. His gaze fell on the last item. It was half a long shaft, exactly the same as the one in his hand. Obviously, it was the other half of the magic tool. After looking through them, Zhang Xian made up his mind and took these items with him out of the divine will. He stretched out his hand and picked up the jade pendant. He discovered that he could sense the location of the crown Een Palace with it, and he could enter it at any time. He pondered for a moment. This jade pendant might be related to the land of good fortune behind the clear sink chaotic territory. It might be useful if he came down, so he put it away for now. Then he looked at the other half of the long shaft. With a thought, the other half of the shaft also appeared out of thin air. When the two items were placed together, they immediately attracted each other and released a spiritual light at the same time. In the blink of an eye, they were completely restored. When he looked at it again, it was no longer a long shaft, but a pair of jade shafts that were side by side. It looked like a picture scroll that had been folded together. He sensed it and found that it was difficult to control it with just his magic power. Thus, he reached out and held the two shafts, slowly separating them. In an instant, he felt his divine will expand, and he felt as if he was in silence. He could see countless worlds appearing and disappearing. He immediately understood that this thing could help him see all the changes in the silence, and he didn't need to use his own consciousness or body to appear in the world. From the looks of it, this item was indeed very useful in searching for a place of fortune. It could avoid that existence during the search. As for how to obtain it after finding it, that was another matter. He could think of a way to deal with it later. His divine will wandered through the evolved silence, and he found that it was just as he had expected. Although this thing could help cultivators sense the land of good fortune, its use was extremely limited, and he couldn't rely on it too much. However, the chance of finding it was greater than before, which was still good. He flicked his sleeve and put away the three items. Then, with a thought, the door of two realms suddenly opened, and his consciousness returned to his body. In the Qinghuan Palace, Zhang Yan opened his eyes. Out of the 4 lands of good fortune, 3 were now in his hands. He thought that even if he could achieve this step, it would be a long time later. He didn't expect it to be so smooth. At this moment, he could feel an endless stream of energy surging into him. This was because the path he took contained the Tao of seeking external help. As long as he possessed the essence of good fortune, then his cultivation would be able to grow continuously after he comprehended it thoroughly. As he saw more of the principles of the Grand Tao, he could faintly see some of the profundities that led to the second stage, and he couldn't help but be slightly moved. It was no wonder that none of the fellow Taoists around him could reach this stage. Because even though it was possible to directly reach this stage by relying purely on cultivation, the process would be extremely long. Only by seeing these things would one have the chance to take a step forward. He wasn't the only one who could see these profundities. After a cultivator passed the gate of enlightenment, they would meditate for a long time, and if they were lucky, then they would be able to comprehend these profundities at a certain moment. Perhaps some people would notice it when they first passed the gate of enlightenment, or perhaps they wouldn't be able to see it for a long time, and it would purely depend on their own luck. But now, it was entirely because of the Weili that converged the 3 lands of good fortune. He instantly broke through the heavens, and just now, he was able to see a trace of the profundities. It was just that the lands of good fortune were extremely difficult to find. For cultivators who walked the path of seeking Tao outside, they would fight for nothing more than these things. If he obtained some at this moment, then the others would inevitably go less. There was an invisible contradiction, because the person who advanced the fastest would undoubtedly be the one who blocked everyone's path. Fortunately, there was no need to think about this now. With that person's existence above, those who sought Tao outside would be unable to cultivate even if they wanted to. Therefore, before defeating that person, these contradictions could be concealed. Therefore, for some people, this great calamity could be said to be an opportunity. He thought about it for a moment. Right now, there was only the land behind the Qingchen chaotic domain that was not under his control. Based on the creation Weili that he could mobilize, even if the gate of 2 realms behind the Qingchen chaotic domain was firmly controlled by Taoist sky-reaching, because the 4 domains were connected, he could still use the great Weili that he possessed to forcibly push open the gate and directly kill his way to the Qingchen chaotic domain. He wasn't in a hurry to go there. Even though he had fought Taoist sky-reaching several times, he still didn't understand this opponent very well. After all, he was going to fight in Taoist sky-reaching's home ground, so he needed to make more preparations. When he thought up to this point, his thoughts changed, and he went to the nameless domain that was suppressing Taoist Xianche and Daoren. Ever since Zhang Yan left last time, Taoist Xian Che had been resisting the omnipresent pressure around him with all his might. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt his body lighten and finally regained his senses. When he looked up, he saw that it was Zhang Yan in front of him, and his eyes couldn't help but narrow. With a thought, Zhang Yan drew out the jade pendant and let it float in the air. He asked, "Does this belong to you, fellow Taoist?" When Taoist Xian Che saw this, his expression immediately changed. He said, "Could it be that the land of good fortune has already been seized by you?" Then he said, "No, if that's the case, there's no need for you to come see me. Looks like Towering Sky really obtained this item from you, sir." Zhang Yan put the jade pendant away and said, "I have some questions to ask you, sir. It's fine if you're not willing to answer them." Taoist Xian Che was silent for a while before he said, "What do you want to ask, sir?" Zhang Yan said, "First, why is the token in Towering Sky's hands?" Taoist Xian Che sighed and said, "Back then, I acted according to teacher's arrangements. If everything went smoothly, I would have achieved something. However, I encountered some difficulties in my cultivation, and I couldn't enter the upper realm for a long time. At that time, I received Towering Sky's help, and the doubts in my heart were resolved. Just now, I'm able to enter the upper realm. Because of this, I owe him a favor." Zhang Yan said, "He wouldn't help you for no reason." Taoist Xian Che said calmly, "I also know that the void separation tribulation is right in front of us, and he just wants to seek protection in a land of fortune. If it wasn't for Teacher Whaley's protection, he wouldn't have been able to enter. Why would he be so polite to me? He must have barged in first and snatched this away. However, I was able to succeed because I owed him a favor. Considering that I couldn't defeat that existence on my own, I joined forces with them." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Even so, Sir should be the leader. Why did Towering Sky become the leader instead?" Taoist Xian Che said, "This is because fellow Taoist Towering Sky's cultivation is the highest among us. With him controlling this place, it would be easier to fight against that existence." Speaking up to this point, he cupped his hands and said, "That's the truth. I've already told you everything that I can tell you. Some of the secrets that involve fellow Taoist Towering Sky, so forgive me for not being able to tell you now." Zhang Yan glanced at him and didn't ask any more questions. He suppressed Taoist Xian Che once more and turned around to return to the main hall. This person's words were half true and half false, and he was also very secretive. He avoided talking about how Towering Sky had colluded with him, his background, and his relationship with the ancestral master. After listening to him, he was certain that the truth was far from as simple as what he said. Fortunately, he didn't expect this person to tell the truth. However, even if it was all false, he could still obtain some useful information from it to help him understand this enemy. Inside the Cloud's Palace, Taoist Towering Sky was sitting on a long rainbow, using the land of creation to observe the profound principles of the Great Tao. However, he felt a sense of unease for some reason. He tried to divine it, but he couldn't find anything. However, because the existence's magic power was fluctuating endlessly, it was obvious that he hadn't finished off his opponent yet. Therefore, he was certain that the danger didn't come from the silence. He immediately thought of his consciousness incarnation, and his expression couldn't help but turn solemn. If he failed this time, the land of creation behind the auspicious chaotic domain would definitely fall into Zhang Yan's hands. He could imagine that person's next step would be to come for him. This time, if he didn't have a way to deal with it and lost another opportunity, there would be no way out. Chapter 2045. Zhang Yan looked into the depths of the void. Now that he had 3 places of fortune in his hands, he had more confidence. The battle in the void was still going on, but the fluctuations of that existence's aura were much more stable than before. Although the signs were not very obvious, the appearance of such a trend meant that the other side was slipping in the direction of defeat. If he wanted to go forward and help the battle as he had previously planned, he would need to move as fast as possible. He pondered for a moment. If he wanted to successfully take back the last land of fortune, The safest way was to cultivate to the second stage. This would allow him to subdue his opponent with absolute strength, and he could guarantee that no accidents would occur. However, he also knew that although he had comprehended the key point and reached this stage much faster than others of the same generation, he could not be sure how long it would take. The battle in the void could end at any time, and if he delayed for too long, it was very likely that he would not be able to make it in time. After that existence had won and digested the results of the battle, he would definitely come to Bushutian. After all, this place had long been exposed. At that time, he was afraid that he would only be able to deal with that existence with all his strength and would not have the time to recover that place. Therefore, after thinking about it repeatedly, he decided not to delay any longer. He would go to the place of fortune behind the clear sync chaotic domain as soon as possible and take it back. Judging from the magic power of both sides and the amount of Whaley that could be used, there was no doubt that he was currently superior to his opponent. However, this place was still Taoist Skyreaching's home ground, and he would have a great advantage, so this battle would definitely not be easy. This was because this time, he needed to fight with Taoist Skyreaching directly. Even if he did not go to the void, he did not know how long he would be away from Bushutian. Therefore, before that, he still had to sort out the situation behind him. He immediately sent a message to invite Zhang Yuan and Qin Sheng. After a detailed discussion with them, he invited the two of them to stay at the Ji Yuan place of fortune. This was to prevent this generation from having any ulterior motives, and if they were to make a move, it would be convenient to suppress them. Zhang Yuan and Qin Sheng were not on the same side, so they could restrain each other. The two of them did not resist. Obviously, they also knew that this was inevitable. After saying goodbye to him, they went their separate ways. Seeing this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but nod. As a result, all the spirit refinement cultivators who came to seek protection were placed separately by him, and because the two worlds were closed, without his permission, it was difficult for them to contact each other. Even if something happened, he could use the Whaley to suppress it with a single thought. He raised his hand and took out the jade pendant he had obtained from Towering Firmament's clone. After taking a look at it, his gaze became profound. This item originally belonged to Taoist Xianche. Logically speaking, he should be able to use the Whaley left behind by the ancestral master after he went to the Soaring Sky Realm's blessed land. He should be able to occupy that place even more smoothly. However, he had no intention of using it on this trip. Although this item had been seized by him during the battle with the consciousness incarnation, and everything seemed reasonable, he still felt that there was a problem. The problem lay with Taoist Xianche. If it was said that Taoist Xianche had taken the initiative to relinquish control of the land of fortune back then, it might have been because he was forced by the circumstances. However, it was very inexplicable that he had even given up the keepsake passed down by the patriarch. When he thought of this, he flicked his sleeve and suppressed it into the depths of Bushutian. After that, he took out another 2 creation fragments and refined them into 2 magic tools. After inspecting them once more and making sure that there were no mistakes, he spread out his magic power and walked out of the Qinghuan Palace towards the clear sync chaotic domain. This time, he didn't conceal his aura. As his magic energy surged, it caused the 4 great chaotic domains to shake violently. Although the 3 Dao Venerables in the chaotic domain couldn't see where Zhang Yan was, they knew that the Exalted One had to be on a journey. Just now, they would cause such a commotion. Dao Venerable Miaoyu transmitted his divine intent. The Exalted One is going to the clear sync chaotic domain. Senior brothers, is the Exalted One going to seize that land of fortune? Dao Venerable Luo Zhan said, I think so. Dao Venerable Sun Yu said, not long ago, the Exalted One came to borrow the seal of the Ji Yuan sect master. He said that it would be used to store the Ji Yuan sect in the lower realms. Yesterday, the seal returned, so this place must be settled. Among the domains, this is the last one left outside. Dao Venerable Luo Zhan said, this is the place where the ancestral master allowed me to hide. It would be best if I could retrieve it in time. Then, it wouldn't be difficult to avoid the tribulation of leaving the void. As for the dispute between the Exalted One, they had no way to judge. Although Luo Zhan and Miaoyu had been suppressed by Zhang Yan previously, They knew that after Taoist Xian Che passed away, the one who occupied the land of fortune now wasn't of the same bloodline. If that outsider won, he definitely wouldn't be polite to them. Therefore, they could only hope that Zhang Yan would return with success. Zhang Yan walked into the clear sync chaotic domain. When he looked up, the original land of fortune was already far away, and the door between the two realms had long since closed. With a thought, he pushed with his magic energy, and a door opened in front of him. The process was very smooth. As the master of the land of fortune on the other side, towering sky didn't stop him. Zhang Yan couldn't help but nod inwardly. It seemed that his choice was undoubtedly correct. If he waited until his cultivation was more profound, he would undoubtedly have an absolute advantage against this person. However, this person would definitely try to stop him from entering the domain. Although he would definitely be able to enter in the end, he didn't know how much time he would have to waste here. Now, on the surface, the difference in cultivation between the two of them wasn't very big. Even if he could borrow the Three Realms fortune Whaley, he couldn't completely control it in Towering Sky's domain. In fact, this person had the opportunity to suppress him. This should be the reason why he didn't obstruct him here. At this moment he moved his consciousness, passed through the door, and landed on the other side. Suddenly, he felt as if he had fallen into a stagnant place. Heavy pressure surged in from all directions, adding countless burdens to his body. He knew that because he had entered the other's domain, all the creation Whaley here were resisting him. And the creation Whaley that he could use was imperceptibly weakened a lot. However, just like the three domains he had refined, the great underworld grandmaster's Whaley still existed here. Obviously, Towering Sky couldn't completely dissolve it. He sensed his opponent's location, and with a thought, he moved there. Looking up, he saw Taoist Towering Sky sitting in the sky. He was wearing the glazed light divine heart robe and a colorful glazed lotus crown on his head. Auspicious clouds surrounded him, and rays of light shone behind him. After he took control of this place, the heavenly priests called him, "Once the world is cleansed, the outer Tao is refined into the rainbow." Thus, the beings of fortune here worshipped him as the rainbow ancestor. When he saw Zhang Yan, he stood up, cupped his fists, and said, "You're here, fellow Taoist. I've been waiting for you for a long time." He had thought it through before he dared to let Zhang Yan enter this place. After all, he had the geographical advantage, and Zhang Yan couldn't use his power much if he wanted to. Moreover, he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet, so he thought he had a certain chance of winning. In truth, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would take so long to arrive. Zhang Yan had occupied 3 places of fortune, so there was no doubt that Zhang Yan's cultivation had improved faster than his own. The later he arrived, the smaller his chances of winning would be. Therefore, even though he had missed several opportunities in the past, he had no choice but to take a gamble. Zhang Yan stood still outside, raised his sleeves and bowed. After Taoist Skirich was done bowing, he said slowly, "When I first came here, I was invited by fellow Taoist Xian Che. Later on, he trusted me greatly, and I entrusted him with the keepsake. That's how I'm allowed to occupy this place. May I ask why you've come to attack me?" Zhang Yan said seriously, "Back then, the founding master gave Xian Che a command token to take care of his fellow sect members after he achieved success. He didn't want him to give the realm under his rule to an outsider. This was a private act, and after he achieved success, not only did he not protect his own sect, but he also stole his own. Today, I have come to take back this place on behalf of the founding master and the other sections." Taoist Skirich smiled deeply and said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you don't know the full story. It's true that the founding master above you is amazing, but didn't he steal these chaotic realms from someone else? If that's the case, it's only natural that I occupy this place." Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. He didn't argue with him at all. The fact that the great underworld founding master's Whaley could be considered the greatest proof of this. Moreover, no matter how Taoist Skirich quibbled, he had obtained this place through Taoist Xian Che. This was a fact that couldn't be denied. It was also possible that the founding master obtained this place from someone else. After all, the land of creation was ownerless in the first place. If someone discovered it, it would inevitably cause a dispute. However, if you want to talk about this, you must first have the same status, seniority, cultivation, and magic power as the great underworld founding master. You haven't even reached that level yet, so it's meaningless to talk about this. Taoist Skirich also knew that he couldn't refute Zhang Yan with just this. Even if he brought out some evidence, it would be useless if Zhang Yan didn't admit it. He only mentioned this matter to make it easier for him to act. His tone softened slightly as he said, "Fellow Taoist, there's actually no need for us to be so hostile towards each other. With that person outside, us fighting here would only be benefiting that person. If you want this place, I can very well give up this place of good fortune." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. He looked at him and said, "What are your conditions, fellow Taoist?" If Taoist Skirich was willing to surrender or resolve the matter in a peaceful manner, it wasn't impossible for him to consider it. Although this would leave behind many problems, forcefully subduing Taoist Skirich wouldn't necessarily solve everything. Just as Taoist Skirich said, dealing with that person was the most important thing. If the other party's conditions weren't too excessive, he didn't want to haggle over it. Taoist Skirich said, "This land of creation can belong to you, fellow Taoist, but you must let me stay here for a period of time. I'll still be the master of this place. When the two realms close again, I'm willing to give it to you. This way we can avoid a conflict." Zhang Yan thought about it for a moment. Taoist Skirich should have some kind of objective. Normally he wouldn't be afraid, but right now he needed to advance a realm as quickly as possible before that person escaped. The only way to accomplish this was to take over the land of creation of the 4 regions. It was destined that he couldn't agree to this, so he replied, "Please forgive me for not being able to agree to your request, fellow Taoist." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.